Welcome, everyone, to our City Council study session for June 10th, 2024. Great to have you all here today. We have a very full agenda, so I will turn it over to our Administrator, Allison Zelms, to start us off.
Thank you, Council President, council members, members of the public. Our first topic this afternoon, is going to be presented by Aaron Luckstein and primarily Matt Crawford as support. So we will be going over high-level updates about the Silver Lake sediment removal and dam modification project and some updates that the team has also from the public meetings that have been happening. So with that, I would turn it over to Aaron Luckstein.
Thank you, Administrator Zelms. You hear me okay? Okay, thank you. Are we good to go on the slide presentation? There we go. Okay. Good afternoon, council members, Council President Carlson, Mayor Norton. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I was requested to come and present information just with a status update, provide information in regards to the latest informational meetings.
Recording in progress.
That we just hosted on June 5th as well as June 10th, and then talk about next steps for what council can anticipate. And then we'll open it up for questions and answer. Matt Crawford is the project manager on this site, so he'll also be available for answering questions. And again, my name is Aaron Luckstein, Deputy Public Works Director for Environmental Services. So first, I'd like to start with the project overview. So there's four primary components associated with the proposed project. These should hopefully be familiar to you. The dredging and sediment removal within Silver Lake, primarily the channel for the South Fork of the Zumbro River through Silver Lake, which is we are required to maintain as part of our Army Corps of Engineers responsibilities as part of the flood control network. So that's one component of it, and that's what's actually started this project. The proposed dam modification is the second piece of it, and then trail improvements that would be allowed as a result of that dam modification, and then a proposed standalone pedestrian bridge that would provide access from the north to south side of the lake or potential future river kind of connection system there that you can see on the bottom right-hand corner of your slide. The main goals for the project, going all the way back to 2018 when this started, is to be able to preserve the majority of Silver Lake, recognizing the importance of that lake. So the top right-hand picture gets at the image with the proposed modification in there and the amount of the lake that would be preserved. We'll talk a little bit about it later on in this slide, but we're attempting to preserve at least 85% or approximately 85% of the existing lake. Second piece is to improve flood passage within the system, primarily associated with using non-mechanical components to be able to move that flood water through, not be dependent on operators or mechanical systems that can fail. Reduce the long-term operation and maintenance costs associated with the existing dam. Again, that ties into the flood passage piece of this. To improve safety and accessibility, improve aquatic life habitat, and then enhance recreational opportunities within this area. So the project status, again, it started back in 2017 with a sediment action level reach. So what that meant is evaluating the amount of sediment within the channel system through the lake. It had met the action level in which we needed to start planning to conduct that dredging. We've been monitoring those lake levels or the sediment levels and keeping that in mind as this project has moved forward. There was also at the time some pedestrian concerns associated with the Broadway Avenue Bridge for crossing that was considered then in the next steps to do an evaluation. With the sediment action level reached, recognizing there was approximately 200,000 cubic yards of material that would need to be removed. There's going to be a several month period where the lake would need to be drawn down in order to conduct that. And so in conversations with the DNR, they said, are there other projects you would like to do at that time, recognizing the significant period in which that lake would need to be lowered? So packaging some of those together. And so in 2018, feasibility was completed by WHKS, our consulting engineer. They then completed a concept plan. And so in 2019 and 2020, the city hosted a series of public open houses. Our engineering firm completed the design concept along with an engineering evaluation, looking at various options associated with the project. Then in December of 2020, the final design concept was approved by City Council and authorization to move forward with the next step, which was the completion of the environmental assessment worksheet. And ultimately, that resulted in a negative declaration, meaning we didn't need to do an environmental impact statement, which is one more step up from the environmental assessment worksheet, meaning we can manage the environmental risks within the proposed project. And that was approved by City Council as a local government unit for that. Then between 2020 and 2022, this project was identified as a legislative bonding priority, and that was for all four components of the project. So full project. Those efforts were not successful, as you are aware. So then in 2023, we shifted a focus and started looking at pursuing funding for the individual components of the project. We looked at the phasing piece of this, of which ones would need to be completed first, and the dam modification is that essential piece, both in terms of timing, relationship, coordination with RPU and some of the work they need to do on the existing dam, but also depending on what happens with the modification, it could change the look of the trails and the pedestrian bridge. So wanted to start there. And so we pursued funding for that, which did result in the submittal of the application for the Lessard-Sam Outdoor Heritage Council funds. We also, our consulting engineers then completed the 30% engineering design and then models, hydraulic models that needed to go along with that. In May of 2024, the Lessard-Sam Outdoor Heritage Council appropriation was approved by legislature. Next step would be coming to City Council to accept those funds, should you choose to accept those funds for the project. Then in June, so June 5th, so it kind of brings us up to basically today, but in June 5th and June 10th, we hosted informational meetings. The one on June 5th was held in person. The one earlier today was remote. We presented information on the project as well as answered as many questions as we could. There were several similar questions throughout, so we tried to package them together as much as we can where there were similarities, but then there was also a lot of just specific questions that were read as they came in, and then ultimately, of course, today at this study session. So a brief summary. So again, we just wrapped those up a couple hours ago at 1:30 here. So I did provide a quick summary. I didn't have the information to put in the packet, but so the June 5th informational session, we counted 90 people. A few people came and went, but then we also, that doesn't include media and city staff that were there. So approximately 90 in attendance for that. On the June 10th, we had 35 individuals that were online. That did include our project team. So there was 5 people as part of our project team were on there. So 30 members of the public listening in on that. The amount, we had 29 pre-submitted questions that we used to then put together the presentation to address as many questions as we can, or that we could as part of that. And then during those informational sessions, we had on June 5th, there was 56 questions that were submitted. 29 came in electronically. Another 27 were handwritten that we read. Many of those had multiple questions though, and we haven't gone through and kind of pieced together. So it's fairly common for someone to submit one submittal, but had 3 questions attached to it. So keep that in mind. And then on June 10th, we had 19 questions submitted. Those were all electronically. And again, there was a handful of those that contained multiple questions. We also set up a feedback form that we listed a QR code and a link to submit it is also on our project website. And so I just pulled this information about an hour before this meeting. We've only had 5 people submit those feedback forms. 2 were the result of the June 5th meeting, and then 3 were the result of the June 10th. And so I'll read just a couple of those, the feedback comments. So 1, the dam's future and the Broadway Bridge redesign should be put into one project for study before any decisions are made on the dam. We feel the 2 projects can be best completed if planned together. Appreciated the format of the in-person open house. So that was one on June 5th. Another And then we did have several, I think people, I will say at the June 5th, I think people got confused with the feedback form versus the question form. So within the question form, we had some of the feedback. So, again, one of the other comments that came in there was, thank you, I appreciated the education on what the dam does, the history, and how it's not a major player in flood control. That was my biggest worry. Other comments were it's cheaper to maintain the existing dam and leave the dam and dig out the entire lake to the maximum depth. This cleans everything up, the lake and downstream. So those were some of the comments submitted. June 10th, we've had 3 of them that have come in. One is, I support this plan to replace the Silver Lake Dam with the Rock Arch Rapids. The second one is, the meeting was very informative and helpful. They also thoroughly answered my questions. Thank you for providing the meeting in different formats. And then the third one was, first, both the presentation and the project website are very well done. Secondly, I think the project would be a very good investment in the future, both to reduce maintenance costs for the dam and recreational and wildlife benefits. I hope it gets fully funded and can move forward. So we'll continue to track all that feedback and bring that back. Right now, the plan is to come back to council on June 17th, so we'll have that information available at that time. The other thing I just wanted to highlight is a few of the common questions that came in as part of those informational sessions. So here's just an example of some of them. And again, there was a lot of kind of variations of these similar questions. So how would removing the dam help during flooding events? And on the flip side, do you foresee any flooding issues downstream during a flooding situation? Will Silver Lake look like Orinoco Lake / Lake Shady as evidence after the removal of that dam several years ago with scrub trees and brush? The 2023 referendum on the sales tax extension was stated to not be used for Silver Lake Dam removal. How can this be mentioned as a funding mechanism? How will dredging be completed in the future? Why has it taken it so long for the city to dredge the lake? How often will the lake be dredged in the future? Why push this project through after 6 years? But another comment that says, what's taking so long to complete this project? What is the timeline for the dam removal and dredging? What is the timeline for trail connections? And then the last is, how can the Rock Arch Rapids and wave pools be safer than the existing dam? So that gives you a flavor of some of the comments and questions that were received as part of the informational meetings. As part of this presentation, I did want to pull out some of the frequently asked questions that we've been hearing over the past several months. And so we'll work through each of these individually. And again, there's been variations of some of these questions over the last few months. So will Silver Lake disappear if the dam is modified? So no, our intention is Silver Lake would not disappear. The dam would be modified, not removed. The lake is currently over 50 acres in size, and 7 to 8 acres would be used for Rock Arch Rapids and wave pools to create a more natural transition to the downstream river levels. 84 to 85% of the lake would remain. So that's our goal there. Again, you have the images that we had put together. These go back to, I think, about 2020, some of the images with the proposed project in there to provide visuals. So will modifying the dam increase the chances of future flooding events? And I apologize, I should have added more information on the 200-year flood, because that is a big part of this too, but it focused mostly on the 100-year requirements. But current dam, so will modifying the dam increase the chances of future flooding events? The current dam does not provide flood control for the 100-year FEMA flood event. To prevent upstream flooding, all the dam's gates must be fully opened before flood peak is reached. So if you listen to the informational meetings, the way the dam works is there's leaf gates that are on the top of the dam, and then there's tainter gates on the side, kind of on the south side. So leaf gates need to be lowered, tainter gates need to be opened and act as if the dam isn't there to be able to move water through the system. So proposed dam modification would allow that same 100-year flow through the system. And again, it should be 200-year flow. It'll allow both the 100-year and the 200-year as the current dam, with no increased flow downstream or flooding upstream. Again, it's flood passage. So as the water comes into the city, it's moving it through. And then we have completed, again, modeling to demonstrate that the new modification would not impact that 100-year or the 200-year river flow. The other, and again, there's different variations of this, is can the current dam be altered to provide fish and recreational passage through either tainter gates or other modifications of the dam? Most of the comments have been towards like the tainter gate side of it. And so based on the assessment, again, some of this is engineering assessment back in 2019 and 2020, and then reviewing Army Corps and DNR design guidance, is that no, those types of changes would not be approved. We wouldn't be able to do that and ultimately get Army Corps of Engineer approval or DNR approval based on their guidance and discussions with them. So we've focused on design modifications that would follow DNR design guidance and meet Army Corps requirements. And you can see in the image, one of the things that the DNR provides is a manual on how to conduct these dam modification projects. So we're using those design principles. Why does the dam modification have to happen now? Rochester Public Utilities, who operates the existing dam in 2019, they had an assessment completed with a future projection of maintenance requirements associated with it. And one of those was to complete an overhaul of the hinge leaf gates. Those were initially installed in 1991. And so the time now as part of that maintenance associated with that called for the overhaul of those. So in 2019, the estimated dollars just for that project was $1.145 million. And then there was some additional dollars after that for assessing the viability of that project. So approximately the RPU had committed $1.24 million technically as part of that project, but the 2019 dollars specifically were that 1.145. So RPU is offered to put that money towards the operation and maintenance for the modification. If the dam modification does not occur, then RPU would move forward with overhauling those hinge leaf gates instead. And they need to move forward with engineering in 2024 to do that project in 2025. So, and in fact, they bumped that out a couple of years, just waiting as we've looked at the funding options, but they're now to the point where they have to complete that project to make sure the system is maintained. So the next is, can the north and south trail extensions and pedestrian bridge be added without the dam being modified? Not going to say never, but based on the discussions we've had, Army Corps of Engineers unlikely to approve both the pedestrian bridge and the trail extensions without modifying the dam. The reason, so adding the trail and the pedestrian bridge would raise floodwaters because you're putting structures in the flood conveyance system. So there's less capacity for water to move through because we've added additional things in there. Those things can also cause trees and other things to get hung up on there, which again raises floodwater. So you have to do a larger modification project to not impact, increase the flood risk. So it's called, we need to achieve a no rise, means that post-construction needs to meet, kind of pre-construction and not make things worse. In addition to that, it would be very, very challenging to meet the ADA requirements to be able to hit the 5% slopes. I didn't put it full in the slide, but I know this question has come up is when our engineers, consulting engineers looked at this. One of the things that in order to meet the 5% grade requirements, you need about 320 feet in order to get down to then have a 14-foot separation between the trail and underneath the bridge. Right now, there's only 122 feet between the dam and the bridge. So we need to open up more space to be able to get the trail through there. And again, then we also have to look at the flood impact. So most likely then, the next opportunity to improve those trail connections would be in 20 years when the Broadway Bridge is reconstructed, looking at either raising that so that the grades can be different or other options. So how does the historic landmark designation of Silver Lake Park impact the proposal to modify the dam? So landmark designation does offer some protection, as you're aware, but modifications are permitted. And I know this was discussed in great detail when the landmark designations came forward. But any proposed changes will be carefully assessed for their impact on the park's historic character. The city's Heritage Preservation Commission will review the proposed modifications and then make a recommendation to council. And then the council will then need to decide whether or not to approve or deny the proposal. using adopted local policies and established federal standards to guide that decision-making process. I'm not an expert in this, so if there's questions on it, we'll have to defer to Irene or Molly, who are the experts on that side of it. But we've been closely speaking with them to make sure we'll be able to effectively meet those requirements. Just a couple more here. So what portion of the project would the Lessard Sam Outdoor Heritage Funds be used for, and when are those funds available? So the Lessard Sam's funds would be exclusively utilized for the dam modification, not the trail components or the pedestrian bridge, just for the dam modification based on that funding source. And again, that funding is dedicated to projects directly related to restoring, protecting, and enhancing habitat for fish, game, and wildlife, and have been used for other dam modification projects in the state. I have had conversations with the DNR who administers, so those dollars are passed through, and the DNR is the fiscal agent for that funding. So in speaking with their grant coordinator, they're anticipating that the draft grant agreement would be submitted to the city in mid-July for then review and negotiation, and then a final proposal most likely late July or August. So if council accepts those funds and the necessary signatures are obtained, then all those funds are set up to be reimbursable. Because it's been approved by the legislature, we can start work as early as July 1, but we can't seek any reimbursements until that grant agreement is fully executed. So then how can the project be phased based on funding? So this is, and I know there's been some confusion on this too, as we've shifted with those 4 components. Initially, was going to try to do all of them at once. How can we do various phases of this? And so right now, after looking through that, staff recommendation is to complete the dam modification, the dredging, and then the North Trail grading, all in phase 1. And primarily that's when the lake level is lowered. We can package those together. And then the grading, that would be less of an impact on the neighboring properties, so that everything would be set to be able to pave the trail and add the amenities into the future. By including that North Trail in the final design, it would allow us to seek grant funding in 2024. There are more funds available for pedestrian improvements, so we feel there's a higher likelihood to get funding for the pedestrian improvements. So we would seek those with the goal of having those funds in place to either then do the construction, the actual final construction, as part of phase 1 or at a later date. Based on obtaining funding and of course, council approval. So any pedestrian improvements not completed in phase 1 can then be completed in future phases, either packaged together or taken individually. So whether it's a standalone pedestrian bridge, the South Trail, or the final construction of the North Trail. And that wouldn't require the lowering of the lake or anything else. So all of that would be set. So then the grades work to do those projects. So project financials, dam modification and North Trail grading, approximately $5.5 million is the estimate right now. Lessard Sam Outdoor Heritage grant funding is for $2.368 million. Again, that still would be required to be, you have to accept those funds through the approval of the grant agreement, should council choose to do that. RPU has their board previously approved $1.24 million to put towards the project, with then discussions for consideration of another $760,000. That still would need to go to board approval in order to solidify those, but approximately, so $2 million we anticipate being available from RPU. City of Rochester, then the remainder portion of that would be $1.13 million. Historically, we have planned to use the flood control funds for that portion of the project. Now, questions have been brought forth with the 2023 referendum, whether or not we can use those funds. And so we've reviewed that, and we have a recommendation. We are working with the attorney's office just to make sure that we're all on the same page, and we'll be bringing that back to council, because ultimately council decides the appropriate use of those funds and how those funds are used. So we are gathering the information needed to make sure you are making an informed decision. The dredging portion of this, right now estimated at $4 million just for the channel portion of it. there is an opportunity to do additional dredging out in the lake to enhance some of the recreational opportunities, water quality, things like that. And so that estimated up to about $1.2 million if there was additional dredging sought as part of that. So next steps, apologize, this is probably a little hard to read, but we at this point anticipate coming to council on June 17th. So just a week from today, and ultimately presenting council with two options. One is to look at maintaining the existing dam, and which would mean RPU would move forward with engineering in 2024 and then construction in 2025 for the overhaul of those leaf gates. We would coordinate the sediment removal with them so that that sediment removal is completed when the lake is lowered. Again, probably that'll be the later part of 2025. But again, that would be coordinated. Again, most likely at this point, based on the preliminary engineering and other assessments, the pedestrian components of this project would most likely not move forward unless, of course, council gave direction to staff to pursue that further. Or you could modify the existing dam with the proposal that currently is in place, the rock arch rapids and the wave pools, various iterations of that. Again, we've completed 30%, so there's a lot that can still be as we go from 30% to 100% based on engagement, make some alterations to that, but generally the rock arch rapids, wave pools approach that would be engineering in 2024 and part of 2025, with then construction starting mid 2025 to late 2025, of course, based on going out for construction bids, council approval, accepting those bids. As you know, there's lots of steps associated with that. Sediment removal would be packaged part of that. Goal would be to do the grading, possibly others based on funding. So funding availability. So anticipated next steps, again, go to council on June 17th. Right now, staff's recommendation, we'd like feedback from you on this, but is to direct staff to finalize that grant agreement with the DNR and bring back to council for approval. To award a scope of services contract with WHKS to move forward from the 30% design to the final design. That would include public engagement, stakeholder engagement, obtaining the necessary permit approvals from the DNR, Army Corps of Engineers, MPCA, all of that associated with the dam modification and the dredging pieces of the project. And then to authorize the advertisement for bids and the schedule opening once the final design is complete. Ultimately, again, council would need to accept those bids, but we would like permission to go out for bids once we have the final design in place to see where the final project cost will be. So went through a lot of that. Any questions or feedback? And Matt, if you want to come up, anticipate some of these are going to be questions for you.
Sure. I will start with the mayor, then I have a question. I'm sure others do as well.
Yeah, just a quick question based on some comments that I've seen in the public and emails I've received. And it's my understanding from all these communications and from past meetings that we're required to dredge the lake periodically.
Correct.
And I think we're like there, but people are saying, and I don't know the answer, so I'm asking, once we do this modification, we will never be able to lower the lake again. And so after this is done, we're stuck in the future. That's what's out there. So could you answer and clarify?
Yep. So that is not correct. And I'm going to let Matt explain a little bit more about dredging options in the future.
Yes, going forward, we still have to monitor and dredge in the future. Our techniques will have to change a little bit. The two most common options we use in that situation, we use dewatering pumps to lower the lake if we want to do a mechanical dredging, or we use hydro dredging, which is like what they do on the Mississippi River and other places, what they did in Lake Zumbro. So we have dredging options still available. Modifications will be changed a little bit, and we have no idea in the next 20 plus years what the new technologies will be out there too.
Great. Thank you for that. So we've seen a lot of pictures of the modification to the dam. Could you just take a minute and explain how that works and why it will not revert back to a river? Just so how it preserves the 85% of the lake?
Yep.
Point level.
And great. And you'll notice I do not have like our 30% engineering designs on here. The plan is June 17th. We'll present that to council, the full project package, all those details. But generally speaking, so yes, approximately 700 feet to the east of where the current dam is. We would construct what is called a weir or a cut wall weir using steel sheets. So it'd look very similar to kind of the current dam right now where that's underwater. You can't see it. But we would have a weir up there to hold the lake level back. And then there would be a series of essentially cascading waterfalls, which are the Rock Arch Rapids, dropping all the way back down over that 700 feet down to the current river level.
Okay.
Underneath that, if you can envision, there's a lot of rock material, clay, things like that, all the way along that full 700 feet, which essentially acts as a really large dam holding all that water back. And then going down to the river. Once you reach the higher flows, and Matt can talk more about this, you know, all the floodwaters are actually up above that. So there's less of a risk. It's not pushing on the base of those flood walls, trying to push that dam. The velocity and the pressure is actually up top, going over the top of it, just like now with the current dam as you reach those higher flows. So does that answer your?
And then the function of the pools as well?
Yep. So the wave pools are on the side. So you'd have, well, Matt, you want to describe the wave pools?
Well, there's
High level.
two paths for the water. One we call the fish passage.
Yep.
That's your low flow. So water is always going to go through there. As water goes up, they start going through the wave pools. And as we have more water, the wave pools become very active and they're designed to be used by kayakers. That's really just a recreational function. The Rock Arch Rapids is where the fish passage goes, and that's the primary function of the new dam modification. The other side, it'll function based on how much water we get. So when there's more water, there'll be more activity going on.
Okay.
And then when we have lower times, those will be a lot less water going in there. So there'll be two kind of, I call them weir cuts, but you're not going to see them. It's going to be all under rock. There'll be a low spot for the fish side, and there'll be a lower spot just a little bit above that one for the pools.
Okay.
And then the rest of the weirs come into place, the rock, as the water goes up. And then everything looks like a river at some point.
Okay.
And again, we'll present this on June 17th, assuming we'll go, going to council. And if you have an opportunity between now and then, we did record today's informational meeting, and that has already been posted on our project website. And we have several images talking about how that will work within that presentation.
Wonderful. I will take a look. Thank you. Councilmember Palmer.
Well, thank you. I've got a lot of questions. So, and just today, you just said two things. One of them is that the height between the trail and the bridge over Broadway needs to be 14 feet, not 10 feet. I was assuming it was 10 feet.
In the engineering report, I know they looked at 14 feet. So I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
Doesn't the MnDOT require 10 feet?
I can't answer that.
We'd have to check that, but 10 feet is typical. We can get most of our maintenance equipment underneath there. So that's probably about the minimum height we get by with.
Okay, well, you said 14, so that's why I'm trying to clarify that. The second thing is that you're talking about in 20 years dredging this lake. One, you said you're going to pump water out, which would be a lot of water to pump. And then the second one is if you dredged it out and push the water out to dewater it, where would you put the sand to dewater it?
Well, you'd have to look at different options of locations. It could be part of the parkland locations or over where we have the snow dump over at the old RPU site. There's different sites available right now. In 20 years from now, we'll see what lands are available. You have to create a dewatering pit where you would pump them to and then haul that material away. So there will be a staging area that has to be developed with that. Just like right now, when the dredging of the mechanical dredging, we still have to have a dewatering pit. So we're going to be using the old snow dump area for the dredging for this first project. So no matter what you do, you're going to need a dewatering location for the material.
Okay. So I've got a bunch of questions. I agree with you that the flood control project will not compromise the lake level and remain unchanged. We all agree to that. We all agree that the 750 feet of shoreline about that's going to be lost on both sides. We agree to that. We agree that the Lessard SAM grant only funds a portion of the dam modifications, correct?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. So I'm going to break this down into different parts that you all been talking about and what the public has been talking about. And so one of them is the crossing across Broadway. Now, talking to Mr. Dombrowski, when we do the new construction on Broadway, he said that route is going to be safer than it is today.
So that is correct.
Okay.
Yep.
And so I asked a while ago for the pedestrian accident or incidents is what you call them. In the last 10 years, we haven't had any pedestrian incidents at that location. So if it's safe now and you're gonna make it safer, that doesn't, do you understand where I'm getting at?
So a couple different things.
Mm-hmm.
So one, as part of the Broadway or the North Broadway project, they will
Mhm.
look at
Correct.
making improvements per our current standards. So those design standards, and Tyler can correct me if I'm wrong on that. So that's one piece of it. This project looks at kind of going above and beyond, adding additional safety features, which is to avoid the
But this is-
intersection
we're-
at there so that you can get a trail passage underneath the bridge on both
But we're
sides
talking
as
about the
part of that.
grant. The grant doesn't have anything to do with going underneath the bridge.
Correct. The
Okay.
grant is only for the dam modification portion of the project.
And that's where people are getting confused.
Okay.
So I want to make sure we're clear on what we're trying to approve.
I think it's important, though, if I may, to go back to your slide that clarifies that funding wise, it's unlikely that if the council and they are fully able to choose this, if you don't move forward at this time with the grant to address the dam modification, RPU will move forward with modification of the existing dam of those side portions, and you wouldn't have that funding to move forward. And highly unlikely, based on what I heard from Mr. Luxine, that you would be able to produce these additional improvements to the trails and meet Army Corps of Engineers requirements based on having zero level change to the lake and meeting the flood control system requirements. So they are related in the sense that you are unlikely to move forward with those trail improvements unless you have a significant dam modification, either now or when the bridge is replaced in 20 years.
Okay. So the point I'm trying to make is if you're going to spend $1.5 million for a trail underneath the bridge and you have a safer crossing that's already safe, I'm not particularly sure that makes good sense. And so, I'm going off an April 5th email that I got. So we agree that Broadway Bridge is going to be rebuilt in 20 years, correct? About?
Approximately.
Okay.
Yep.
And at that time, improvements can be made. What's the cost estimate for funding the trail underneath the bridge? You know?
Can you repeat the question?
The trail underneath the bridge, how much is that going to cost?
So right now, the estimate, so right now, the estimates for the completion of the North Trail after it's graded.
The
would be
North
$500,000.
Trail is different than the bridge, the trail under the bridge. So let's take it by segments. Let's take just the trail underneath the bridge. What's that going to cost?
Do you know off the top of your head, Matt?
No, we don't have a breakdown just for the trail portion directly under the bridge only. It's all combined as one project.
Okay. I've seen in my reading $1.1 million. So there's no plan right now on the south side of the bridge to put a trail under the bridge, correct?
That's not correct. That could be as part of a future phased project that could be allowed if the dam is modified.
But you're not showing that. You're not saying that we're doing that trail.
We are showing that in our images. If you look at the concept image with the South Trail as part of the
But
project.
it doesn't go under the bridge. It goes to the bridge.
No,
That's the
it
north
goes
side.
under the bridge and then potentially connect back
not
up
a
to
trail.
the,
Okay.
The modeling being done is including the fill for both trails on the north and south side. So we are continuing with the design to see how that would function.
Okay. In the dollars that we're using for the North Trail, let's go to the North Trail. The city doesn't own all the property up to the river right now, correct?
There are portions that we have limited ownership between the property and the shoreline, but most of the lands, there is city lands already available that trail could be built on without touching private property.
But there are some portions that doesn't.
Yes, there's some areas that don't.
That's the question. Okay. So that's why we're taking the dredge and we're putting it up against the shoreline to build more land. Isn't that right?
It's reducing the cost of the trail. We will have to build more of a boardwalk out into the water for the areas you don't have enough land. And yes, this project will allow us to create more land that we can build a trail on it more, you can say inexpensively.
Okay. So the channel dredging is required by our agreement with the Corps of Engineers. And that's called flood control, correct?
the maintenance of the flood control system. Yes.
Okay, so the confusing part of this for everybody that I get emails on is how can we use flood control dollars for a flood control project that really isn't doing anything for flood control. You keep saying that the dam doesn't do anything for flood control.
So, correct. And there's a difference though between the dam and Silver Lake holding water back during flood control versus the conveyance system. And again, this is what we will present to council on June 17th and was covered in the informational meetings in which the channel, so the South Fork of the Zumber River channel flowing through, that is what needs to be dredged out, not the other portions of the lake. So there is a difference between that conveyance channel and the rest of the lake.
And the funding
So,
sources are different, it sounds like. We're not using flood control dollars for the dam.
So as of right now, that 1.13 million would be part of that full project, the dam modification, along with the trail grading, things like that. Yes,
I think
currently
that's
that,
what you're trying to get at.
such
right?
the question.
No, without the dollars, we seem to be saying it's not flood control, and then we're saying it is flood control, and then we're saying that we're holding back. So
So-
my understanding of the design, and it's a pretty simple design, is that the channel's gonna go away because the level of the lake is gonna be the same, but the dam is gonna be 3 times larger, so if we have a big flood water come through, it's gonna go over and it's gonna dissipate. Instead of having to open up the dams, it's just gonna be wider and it's gonna go over the top, and it's gonna keep flood control just the way that it is for people. Am I wrong in that?
No, that's correct, but the Silver Lake Dam is part of the conveyance system today. The Corps had to design it to be part of the conveyance system. It has to be operated specifically as directed, or it will cause flooding. So it is part of the flood control system. And we're looking at modifying this flood control system, to move it from a mechanical system to a non-mechanical passive system.
Okay.
Council President, if I can, Matt, maybe you could explain that the way you did in the session earlier today about the two parts of the flood control system, about conveyance and, retention.
Yeah.
It's all part of the overall system. If you could give that explanation, that might
The
help.
Corps did the conveyance through town. So theirs was a widening and deepening of the channel system to move all the water that comes into town, out of town at the same rate.
Mhm.
So at the same time, NRCS created the reservoir system around the city of Rochester, which is where our flood control is being done, where it holds back the water and reduces it and sends it out at a slower rate. That combined rate control that they're doing with the reservoirs reduces the volume to the river by 16%. And then the flood control system in that the Corps did moves all that water through town. So it's two different systems operating together, and the Silver Lake Dam was modified to work with the Corps' conveyance project to convey the 200-year design and not cause flooding. And we're looking at doing is modifying that core design that uses mechanical system to make it a non-mechanical passive system that has numerous environmental and recreational opportunities.
Okay. The sales tax extension vote on 2023 stated no flood control dollars could be spent to removing the dam. We agree to that.
2023 vote, we do agree to that.
Okay. And the standalone pedestrian bridge is not included in the grant.
That's correct.
Okay. The Elton Hills Bridge pedestrian walkway is 1 foot shorter in width than the current Broadway bridge right now. Do you know that's correct?
That's correct. However, the separation distances requirements for Elton Hills Bridge versus the Broadway Bridge, based on traffic, pedestrian uses, there's different design criteria associated with that.
Correct. But it's 1 foot wider on Broadway.
Broadway, I'll say it a different way. Broadway is still too narrow for the pedestrian components based on the proximity to traffic. So there's not enough separation distance between pedestrians and the traffic.
So
And
you're
the
saying,
bridge design is going to be different based on pedestrian usage, traffic, and again, I would defer to Tyler specifically on engineering, but I know we've had several conversations with City Engineer Dombrowski on that.
so you're saying that the Elton Hills Bridge, there's separation between the roadway and the.
Elton Hills Bridge is correct, keeping in mind that you can't, what I'm saying is you can't just say this is what the Elton Hills Bridge is, so therefore the Broadway Bridge should meet the exact same distances, is what I'm saying. There's different design criteria based on speeds, traffic, pedestrian usage, separation, things like that.
Okay, so Elton Hills at that bridge is 40 miles an hour. And at Broadway, it's 30 miles an hour. They're both 4-lane roads, and Elton Hills is not separated. So to me, I'm just trying to use a simple mind. Elton Hills is a little more dangerous than Silver Lake.
I'm going to defer to City Engineer Dombrowski to talk through that in all details. He is the expert
Okay.
on that, not I, unless Tyler, you have anything else you want to weigh in at this time.
Same, if we want to get into design details, we got to talk to Dylan.
Okay. So the grant states the dam is 90 years old and that's a safety hazard. Do we agree that we've had no accidents at the dam in the last 90 years?
Are you talking drownings? What, when you
Accidents.
refer to any accidents?
Accidents going over the bridge, the low head dams are supposed to be dangerous. You go over, you get tied up in the turbulence and then you die.
Correct. I'm not aware of any of those incidents
Okay.
in City of Rochester.
So also the grant states that we're adding 16 miles of fish habitat, which we know is Silver Creek. And the overall comp plan, it says that you're going to have 190 miles will be added to fish habitat. So let's go back to the overall comp plan in the grant application. What is the overall comp plan? Did we look at, is there a copy of that for the city?
So one, I have the application in front of me, so can you please point to which?
I think it's page
sections you're
2.
referring to?
Page 2 of the Silver Lake Dam is here.
Which section on page 2?
I'm looking here.
Is it in the first one?
Let me look for it. Here it is. Let me look for it and I'll get back to it.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Mr. Palmer, could you ask one more and then maybe we'll have others take a turn
I
and
got
get
like
back
4
to
left to
you?
go.
Okay.
The estimated cost of making the 9 upstream dam fish habitat, have we looked at how we're going to modify those 9 dams upstream?
No, we have not. We had talked to the DNR about looking at a plan to figure that out and discuss it at a later time.
And you don't believe that that's part of the grant application?
No, there's no obligation to do any of that work at this time. Like we said, the Silver Lake Dam is the linchpin for this type of work. And if we can't get that one done, it told the DNR it didn't make any sense to move forward with looking at other modifications if the primary one can't get done. So that one gets done, it works. We can look at plans to do other ones and bring those back to the council for discussion.
And my last question, I'll look for my other stuff here. You're trying to use stormwater funds for this. How does that qualify for stormwater?
So we are evaluating funding options and we'll bring that back to council at June 17th.
So the vegetation around the lake right now, is that public works and is that part of the stormwater funds?
So funds for the wetland and vegetation were used for application related to stormwater, correct? But the Parks Department maintains that vegetation in coordination with Public Works Department. So we applied for a grant as part of our stormwater program
Correct.
in order to reduce the amount of E. coli reaching the water body in order to get those reductions. That's what that funding was used for. And then the vegetation was a solution to reduce the amount of E. coli in Silver Lake.
Okay, so it's a stormwater project or is it?
So it's both. So we were able to get credits under our stormwater program for reducing the amount of pollutants entering our water bodies. We applied for those funds, implemented the project. That project is now maintained by the Parks Department in coordination with Public Works.
Okay.
All right, Councilmember Wall.
Thank you, and I appreciate Mr. Palmer's close attention to all these good details. In spite of all the information that's been presented, there is a fear on the part of many in Rochester, at least as I read and hear and get emails about the potential of flooding. And you've talked about the 100-year and the 200-year. I don't know if it's 5 years or 10 years or whenever we get 6 inches of rain. Can you unequivocally say that this will have no effect at all on flooding downstream in Rochester or flooding from Silver Lake as we collect water?
the design will be based to match the Corps and the FEMA's requirements. So it'll pass the same amount of water as it does today, which does not provide flooding downstream. Will be the same amount of water going downstream. There's no rate control provided by it. When we're done, we have to work with FEMA through the DNR to match the models to show that it works for the design storms. So there will be no change to the elevations. Will match current conditions.
And so we have to depend on information available, the modeling that we use for those storm events, design guidance, in order to make sure that we're providing the highest level of protection that we can.
And has the Army Corps of Engineers already signed off on this project?
No, they have not. They will not do that until we have a final 100% engineering design and an application submitted to them.
So there's work yet to be done to be able to say this will have a zero difference in terms of flood control in Rochester.
Correct. Yes, we still need to get DNR, Army Corps of Engineer approval, 100% final design and all the modeling that would go along with that to demonstrate it.
But that is the goal.
Yes, but we have done current preliminary models that show that this works with consultants that does this for Minnesota and other communities.
If I can, Council President, I'll add that that is a requirement of the design, just to say it another way, that there is no change, right? So the work that needs to be done is to fit the design to that baseline requirement.
Councilmember Keen.
Thank you. So I want to, just to start, I mean, I went and visited one of this, the Rock Arch Rapid Dam down in Central City, Iowa. Like any sort of project like this, it's different than what we would do in Silver Lake. But I guess I want to bring into the discussion that this isn't experimental stuff. This is things that are being done in many other places around the country. And this one, it looks like a lot more water going over this one, but it's been very successful as far as an amenity to the city and an environmental improvement. You know, I too have been seeing all these different sort of concerns with the dam. A lot of them have been addressed, but I still want to talk a little bit about the funding methods and the process integrity. As far as I'm concerned, the other ones like the private property rights or historic preservation or downstream effects, I think those have been addressed in our Q&A, and I think they've been answered respectfully and to the point that I don't think we need to deal with those. But I did want to just talk on the funding methods. And I do find the way we're funding this, like the scaffold funding with the heritage money connected to the dredging money and that, there is nothing you know, unique or shady about that. That I've seen many of our projects that we try to do a couple of things at the same time. That's a normal method. We have RPU projects going on where we talk about combining money or city streets where we're using RPU money and city street improvements and water or sewer money. It's a very common method of funding projects. So I've spent enough time with it that I'm convinced that it's a normal and a good way to do things. The other one, as far as process integrity, I again, same thing with, I mean, I've been watching this sort of like this, that the staff is out of sync with the council or that the council is being driven by the staff on this. And I've studied the different points here and the idea of when we apply for something. And again, I'm personally convinced that, you know, the staff is taking direction from the council that voted to approve a project like this with the first step of trying to find the funding. So again, on those two areas, as far as process integrity and funding sources, I'm convinced that we're going about this the right way. There is this point right now that I think we're at this sort of timing risk where we've got dredging and the RPU project that should happen starting in early 2025. And we've got this that needs to connect to it for them to be all done at the same time in order to only drop the lake down once. I do get concerned when I said we're going to go to historic preservation for a recommendation, that it makes me think that that's got to be time boxed somehow, that we don't end up dragging things out and missing our deadlines because we've made these process changes. So it's probably good to get those recommendations. I think there was a lot of discussion at the time of historic declaration for Silver Lake that this was discussed as it wouldn't be, but the effects it could have on the lake, I'm comfortable with them looking at it and coming back with a recommendation, but I would be uncomfortable if that wasn't good, if that was going to hold up the project. So I don't want that in the process, or if it is, it's got to be by a date certain and not just hanging out there. Councilmember Palmer brings up a lot of topics that question the value created by the work, and I think that's part of his job and part of what we should be doing. At the same time, I think some of these sort of like, isn't it true sort of questions is what's causing a lot of concern in the community that is everything being handled correctly? Because it does seem to throw some shade on that things aren't being done right. I think it's important that I point out that this city council back in 2020 voted 6-1 in favor of this project. The DNR and through the heritage funding is coming to say, this is a good project. And we're not even talking about the ecology and benefits to the river and the creek and the water quality. These are the kind of things we need to take into account too. Our bike and ped would identify this as one of the biggest gaps in our trail system. And even though those improvements only come as a byproduct of this work, it should be lost on nobody that none of those things happen without this work. Based on that and based on where we're at this point, you're going to be looking next week at what we need to approve these, and I'll come to the meeting with the idea of wanting to support these recommendations.
Thank you, Councilmember Keen. Councilmember Dennis.
Okay, thank you. So I have just a few questions, but one, just kind of logistics of this situation. We've had public engagement, and now this is the study session, which in my, please correct me if colleagues have, but is to bring information to the council. But we're in this situation where we're, not in the city hall, which confuses people. Of course, there's the way over here is the information that we're looking at. So we're trying to listen and looking over here and can't read it because it's too small, and we don't have our ability to ask questions. There's some confusion about mapping. So I just wanted to point that out, that this venue is not, I believe, a good setup for having discussion and having information when we as a council can't even see the information effectively when you're presenting it. So just kind of I don't know, my 2 cents on that. I think this could have been done better on many levels for public engagement and for information presenting. So, but on that note, also about public engagement, I wanted to state, I attended the April 6th, 2022 public engagement, and then I read the letter that was sent to us after the fact, that was sent to the chairs of the committees that were voting on the grant, and that it was signed by Mayor Norton, President Brooke Carlson, and City Administrator Allison Zelms. And then this letter that, of course, I was not informed of and did not see until after it was signed and submitted, has quite impressive numbers, like that 79% support response. I won't read all the details. I'm sure people can access this if they request it. But when I attended that meeting, that wasn't what I experienced in 2022. That's not what I experienced when I attended the June 5th meeting. And I wasn't able to attend because it was today, which I find really kind of pushing the buzzer, for June 10th. When I showed up and I was a little late because it was, I was in the calls with other things and a big meeting here. I counted, if you took away the staff and the council members, I see Keen was there, and the media, I counted 13 people that were present, residents. You said 30. Maybe my counting was wrong, so I definitely, if it's recorded, we can go back. But a lot of these numbers I see include staff, which of course are very well populated in all of these meetings. It includes council members and other elected officials. It includes members of the media, which come and cover this. And so I'm just questioning the accuracy of the numbers who are in attendance to these meetings, because when you say 90 and 30, and I've taken pictures, you can count people, if needed or whatnot. But I believe from my lived experience attending these, I feel these numbers are a little inflated when it came to how many residents actually attended. And then I also believe the percentage of approval in this letter sent to the chairs for the grant was also perhaps a little, perhaps exaggerated. But I don't have the exact dynamics, but what I experienced was not that case. So I just wanted to point that out. So when representing these kind of information for public engagement, how is this advertised? I advertised on social media a little bit. I tried to, get the word out, but how is it advertised so people across the city, which is, the third largest city, a lot of people to connect with, how do we advertise so that people can, and, so there would be more than 30 or 13 or whatever number attendance for today's virtual meeting?
Good question. So one of the things that we did is we did post it on social media. We posted on our project website. We did a press release and sent it out to the local news media outlets to get the information out from that side of it. A couple of the other comments that you make, the survey results were from our public open house meetings in 2019 and 2020. That information is on our project website. We've also presented that in the informational meeting, the results of those surveys, and you can see that online with that. The other is just clarification. I said project team members. That's myself, Matt Crawford, Megan Wohler, Jenna Bauman, and Tyler Niemeyer as part of our public informational meeting. So I'm counting those 5. If there's other staff on there, I did not count them. I don't know if they were there as residents, but we didn't plant anybody in the meeting. Just saying we had 5 project team members there that were on that informational meeting, and that's what we're counting. So.
Well, no, I would never, just to clarify, because I know there's a lot of assumptions when I talk. I'm not saying anyone was planted. I'm just saying when I was counting, I just went through and counted the people, and like Randy Peterson, I believe, was there for Post Bulletin. Maybe he was there for a citizen instead of media. I don't know. But when I went through and counted people that I knew were not media and were not elected officials or any kind of government, I just came up with a different number. So that's what my thoughts were on that. But a couple other questions. Oh, sorry.
Councilmember Dennis, if I can, just to go back to the public information session we had at our CTC, I personally counted that room and deducted all staff and council members from my count, and I came up at 87. And then some other people came and went throughout the meeting. So the estimate of 90 came from me, and I was trying to deduct anybody that wouldn't be counted as public from that meeting. So
Okay. Well,
just so you know.
I didn't count. I was in the back and I but I did just note that it didn't seem like that. The one today, if it was recorded, that was another question I had. Why wasn't the June 5th, which was very well attended in comparison to the 1330 versus the 90, why was that not recorded? Because there was amazing questions that, people have I don't have my cell phone with me right here. People have cell phones. There's a million ways, not million, exaggerated, a lot of ways that people can record meetings. Why was that not recorded for record for those residents who had questions?
Yep. So logistically, it was easier to record the June 5th or the June 10th one, since we were already doing that virtually, to be able to do that. We did ask several of the same questions that came forth as part of the June 5th, just to reiterate those at the June 10th, in addition to the additional questions that came in. To try and cover
I
both
see it.
areas.
I see it. On the June 10th, you handed out these papers to everybody. These people could take pictures of the QR code and stuff. And there was a lot of different questions answered. Asked and answers. And I tried to video a little snippets of it, and it was hard because there was a long meeting. But I feel for accountability and transparency and having people have their, questions answered and be able to, have that on record. I think that would have been in the future, having all of them recorded, because people who are techie in this city, I believe, could find a way of recording those. So
Sure. Thank you.
that's what I think.
In regards to feedback and those questions, just to let you know, we did keep all those cards. We've scanned those, so we have those available, as well as put them all on a spreadsheet to be able to track all of the comments that have been submitted, either in writing or via the electronic form.
Okay, well, wonderful. So one question, one question that a resident came back to me and asked that wasn't sure if it, so I'm going to jump around. I have a couple more here, but if the project is modified after the approval, is that a possibility? I'm not wording his question correctly. But once it's approved and can it be modified? Can it be reversed? What can be done once we have solidified, if we solidify an approval for this project to move forward, can it be modified?
Well, there's some modifications that can be done, like I mentioned today's meeting, that if we wanted to move forward and flop the pools and the rock arch rapids from one side to the other. So those type of modifications could be done. Minor tweaks to it could be done like that. The distance to meet the fish passage, that's kind of set in stone. We can't change much of that. But yes, as you move forward, there's still things we can tweak as you move closer to the final permit with the Corps. And with the DNR, we kind of have to have a set plan at some point that they approve. And if we were to change those, we have to go back and get additional approvals from them again. So
But so if it doesn't work, it just doesn't work, we can't go back to the dam. Is that correct? I'm just curious, because I mean, if we realize that this wasn't what we thought was gonna happen, and can it go back to how we
to
have it now?
a dam like it is today,
But it will safer, a different dam, but yes, it's the same.
I mean, there's modifications you could go for, but it would not look like today's dam. That would not be built like that again.
Thank you. And then a couple other quick questions too. Okay, I just want to this has been said, but so the public trail extension, all of this, because a lot of people in Ward 6, that is their big thing. Councilmember Dennis, you have to vote for this because we need the trail. We want the trail. Is that, to my recollection, okay, I'm asking, is that a guarantee? Or is that we're setting it up and we're hoping and but is the public trail extension a guarantee if we pass this? Guarantee.
So nothing's guaranteed until we have final council approval. So until we have that,
But we don't have
nothing's
the
absolutely
funding.
guaranteed. Now, if I go back, the full project, so if you look at, that is part of the vision for the full project. And as I explained earlier in the slide, and we'll talk more on June 17th, there are some phasing options. So right now, staff's recommendation is to phase this based on available funding and pursue
Available
a-
funding. So the
additional.
funding's not guaranteed.
Correct. And so
Okay,
right now,
just
the
wanna go over
funding
here.
is not in place for like the South Trail connection.
I just want
So,
to
but
make
the
sure
goal
that,
would be to pursue funding. As funding becomes available, move those projects forward to council. If council supports those or not, that then would dictate whether or not those projects happen.
so funding, depending on funding, so funding's not guaranteed, so it's not guaranteed. But it's in the proposal. So I get that. So, but then there is possibilities in the future of still doing the trail in different, I mean, I think there's so many possibilities. Anyway, so I'm sorry, I'm not.
Yep,
going
and
for the little
so,
thing,
so
but-
potentially again, but they would look very different depending on whether the existing dam is in place or it's a modified dam. And so that's why, and again, and RPU needs to receive direction. And if council takes no action, I think that's the direction to RPU, is to spend the $1.24 million to to overhaul the leaf gates, which then essentially means that the existing dam's going to stay in place. Future trails would be very, very challenging to put in place in order to meet all of the flood control, flood passage requirements, ADA requirements, things of that nature. So, yeah, so those two paths could look very different, whether or not council chooses to maintain the existing dam or to modify it and open up some of those other opportunities.
Thank you. I have one more question. So on that kind of, so yes, ADA is very, very important for me and for many people. There is also, fish environment. I mean, there's a wonderful, I've been to so much research and time, wonderful things. I am a huge supporter of the environment. I see this, but a question that also comes to heart when it deals with children, when it deals with vulnerable populations, is liability. And I personally, as a person, do not allow my children to swim in Silver Lake. I don't do that. I don't feel, other people do, no judgments, but I personally feel it's not clean enough for my, I just worry about, I'm a biology teacher, high school biology teacher, I'm like, petri dishes and stuff. Oh, but I don't allow them to swim. So I worry about this water quality. I worry about the liability of this is very tempting. Oh, I see this and I want to go play in the water after I'm looking at a picture I have of the proposal, and I want to go play. I want to go run around bare feet. Oh, I have cuts on my feet. That's run around or whatever. The kids, and you have vulnerable populations, kids with autism, hidden disabilities, kids with physical, all different dynamics of awareness of the safety. Has that been analyzed? That's a long question, but analyzed for, just the basic safety of people having that, what do you call it when you, a nuisance, attractive nuisance, right? I'm not saying this is attractive nuisance, not saying that, but if you hold, which to my knowledge is if you have a ladder up to the wall, kids who climb, you're liable. If you attract kids in something that might not be 100%, don't quote me on all this, but I am record, but I worry about kids being attracted to this. And then there is some kind of safety issue if it's quality water, if it's, hazards. I don't know. Can you just address some of that, how that has been looked at and will be prevented for kids who aren't attracted to the lake right now because their parents is like, "Eh, it's dirty," but then they are, and then now they see this where it's almost made to be, having people brought into.
Sure.
Thank you.
I'll get started in some of the things we've looked at. I'll defer to Minister Zelms or Mr. Parrish if there's additional things you want to add in terms of liability. But one of the things that we looked at, again, using DNR's design considerations in terms of modifying low head dams into these rock arch rapids type style, that let me back up. There's always risks associated with recreating in public waters. There is, and I'm not going to deny that, but there's also then user responsibility associated with that. But now when we look at the design, so one of the things we did, again, going by the guidance that the Minnesota DNR has for conducting these projects, that the rock arch rapids are safer than low head dams because of the potential risks associated with them. So those are the things that we had looked at in terms of water quality. People are recreating on Silver Lake right now. One of the things that the city is doing to improve water quality within Rochester, one, we partner with Olmsted County Soil and Water Conservation District. We are an active members of the Greater Zumbro River Watershed Commission, in which we are looking at reductions. A lot of Rochester's water quality is impacted by the quality of water flowing into Rochester. And if you remember about a year ago, I put together a water quality report for council, specifically kind of looking at impairments and things of that nature. So there's lots of efforts we are doing to improve water quality. Our stormwater management program, looking at reducing pollutants, loading, whether it's from parking lots, construction, things of that nature. As part of this project, we actually did some E. coli testing within the Silver Lake and the river just to start addressing some of that concern. Now, we don't have a robust data set, but when we compared the data, it was very similar to what you would see in the river, other stretches of the Zumbro River, things like that. So not exorbitantly higher than other water bodies in which people are recreating in which we've used that kind of as a proxy to do the risk comparison. Now, in terms of liability insurance, I can't speak to that, so.
Thank you. Thank you.
Councilmember Bransford.
Pretty simple question. I'm just curious, if we give the thumbs up on Monday, what can we actually afford to do? I mean, are there funding gaps? I mean, so let's say we approve this on Monday and then that just gives you the complete green light to go ahead and just go. What can you do and what couldn't you do with the amount of money that we have right now on the table?
So make a couple assumptions. So with that green light, I would say that also means then approval of the SART-SAM's, agreement. Yep. So that would be then the dam modifications right now, based on engineering estimates, be able to do the dam modification, which is installing the cut wall weir, rock arch rapids, wave pools. It would be the grading for the North Trail. So getting all that set up that you could then do paving in the future. But just grading only, and then the dredging of the river channel or the lake. Again, there's approximately $11 million in our flood control reserves from the 1989 sales tax. That's what would be used then that it was set aside for dredging. So the dredging would be a part of that. So that's right now from available funding portions of the project we could do.
So we say thumbs up. Every time I say dam modification, I get a little leery of that. So we can do the dam modification and the dredging. So that we would have sufficient funds with the thumbs up on Monday and including the grant, we could do that.
and the grading for the North Trail,
Well,
which is an important, yep,
Right,
piece
right,
of that,
right.
as well as it would be full engineering for all the components so
Okay.
that the engineering plan is set. So then for those future phases, again, with the caveat, all of these requires Army Corps of Engineer approval,
Got it.
MPCA
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
approval.
I'm just
DNR
talking
approval.
pure
Yep,
money.
Yep.
What you didn't mention, although you just did at the end with the engineering approval in the engineering design, would be that final community engagement to get to the design that will be successfully approved by those bodies, right?
Correct.
And the community. Councilmember Palmer, I think, had one other question. Yeah.
Okay, so on my page 2, the first paragraph there, the abstract, it says, this project is the first step in a comprehensive, long-term approach to modify all low head dams in the city to improve habitat in the South Sunbelt. So what is I mean, when I read the grant, it's kind of like, this is what we plan on doing. Where is this comprehensive plan?
So no, we don't use the word plan. This is an approach. And so this came out of the discussions with the DNR in which they identified concerns with the number of dam modifications or the number of dams throughout this entire river network. And so when we talked with them, again, and they agreed to this, we looked at the Silver Lake Dam as the largest impediment for fish passage. And so that's where we would start, because if we don't change this one, it would make it, there's less of a benefit for modifying any of the other ones. And so we said, let's start here, because we need to do the dredging. Again, if you back up, big picture, the lake's gonna have to be lowered for several months. So we need to do some of these other projects. So the timing is tied to modifying the Silver Lake Dam. If we can't do this one, then we're not gonna spend time looking at modifying the rest of those. That's the approach that we had discussed with the DNR, and we have talked with the Lessard Sams folks about that approach and how that ties to the project as it went through the funding process.
So when I read this, I'm making the assumption that we're on the string to modify the next 9 dams and we don't have funding for that. So that's a concern of mine.
That's,
Yep.
I just think it's important to clarify that is absolutely not accurate and not what Lessard Sams approved when they approved the funding just for this project. It is just for the dam modification at Silver Lake. That is the only thing they approved. That is what will be in the grant agreement.
Correct.
Okay, and I'm just reading the sentence, and I'm just telling you how I read the sentence, and I apologize if I read it incorrectly. So my questions for you today were to clarify, to get rid of all the difference people, because what I'm afraid of is that we're gonna accept this grant, and then people are gonna say, well, how come I can't get underneath Broadway? How come the North Trail's not built? How come this isn't built? Because we don't have the funding in place for those. I understand we have to do step 1 to get to that step. I understand that we have dredging money, and I support the dredging of Silver Lake. I think it's past due, and that's flood control. I understand that. You know, we talk about integrity of how this all went down. What's funny about it is if you watch on the Senate floor, the Lessard Sams grant people said, we're going to change it that from now on our jurisdictions will approve it prior to applying, which it just kind of made sense. Go back to somebody mentioned something about funding. It's different when you're doing a water main and you're doing a road, because now you're using sales tax extension money that we voted on last year that says you couldn't use that money. And then you want to use stormwater dollars. And so for me in my head, I need to be comfortable that yes, this falls into flood control, and yes, this falls into stormwater. So
And Councilmember Palmer, that was an inaccurate statement. So just
what was inaccurate?
clarifying that they're not proposing to use 2023 sales tax. They're proposing to use unspent from our previous sales tax, correct?
So yeah, 2 different things. One, at the June 17th meeting, we will bring forth recommended funding. So funding recommendation, whether it's stormwater utilities, whether it's flood control funds, that will be coming forward. We are looking into a few things. Again, I want to make sure council is making an informed decision on that
But
side of
it
it.
is not
Two-
2023 sales
Correct.
tax.
That's the other key piece. There are,
But we
two-
did-
and
we-
and this, I know this has been presented to council when when the local option sales tax was approved. There are 2 different pots of money for flood control. And it's very important that we keep those separate. So one, the 1989 approval, and it had very specific language in which how those funds could be used. And there's, the guidance throughout the last several years that the council has followed in when determining whether or not that's appropriate use of those funds. And then there's the 2023 funds, which again have a different set of criteria for how those funds can be used. So any reference to flood control funds in the application, in discussions, are the 1989 funds that are in reserves.
Okay, and the point I'm trying to get across is when we made the presentation, you were aware of that and you were at some of these presentations. We said we needed to vote for this so that we could keep funding our flood control project. And so we knew that we had $6 million to have to do I think it was $6 million to dredge. So the last question for you is in this North Trail. Where does the funding come from that? Because it doesn't come from the SAR SAMs. It doesn't come from the dredging. Is there a trail fund that we're using to fund for this?
So in preparation for the June 17th meeting, we've identified several different funding options in terms of grants that can be pursued, and talking with parks about potential pots of money for any of those matches. And we'll present that on June 17th. So it's good to know that's important.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Councilmember Keen.
And I just want to clarify a couple of things that have been said. Councilmember Bransford asked about what do I get for this, but I do want to clarify that we're going to be asked to accept the grant. We're going to be asked to award the scope of work, but then also to go out for bids. I think that's different than saying we're going to buy something on Monday night. We're really going out, and before those bids are accepted, it would come back to council. So they're just little nuances, but I wanted to make sure nobody read it as we're writing checks to get work done on the 17th. We're pretty far away from that. Yep. And yeah, again, just the discussion bothered me a little bit. And then Councilmember Dennis tried to bring up this idea, like, are we gathering public information? And it's always difficult to do this. There's every project we have, we feel like we don't hear enough input, or we hear input that's skewed towards current people or certain people that are worried about a specific project versus the will of the overall community. That's an ongoing problem. And again, I think you guys handle it well, but I don't want to take it out as a specific issue to how we engage with the public on this project. Third, again, Councilmember Palmer again brings up these things, but some of them do create this confusion. I've dealt with people who are convinced that we're spending money out of the 2023 things illegally. And I think it's because of these discussions continue to happen. I've looked into this and we are not doing that. I've looked into how we're protecting the LaSarge SAM money to make sure we're following their rules and how we accept their money. And I think this idea of how to fund the trails and some of this other thing is still an open question, which is why they're phase 2 and beyond and not in phase 1. The one thing I would like to see on the 17th, if it's possible, there was the idea of, could we add the snow dump area into the lake, and what would be the delta cost on the project for that? Basically expanding the lake in another area that would take a lot of engineering. And is there a way to say, like, do we have the runway left to say, if you wanted to make this a full project and come up with this, this council would have to come up with this much money? Can we get to that point to be able to look at it on the 17th and say, we could do those trails extensions with this work, with this amount of money added to it? The same way we looked at Silver Lake Pool and said, you can get this, but this is what it will cost you.
By the 17th, which means Wednesday.
So one, we can have preliminary estimates available, keeping in mind that those were based on 2019 and then updated in 2022. We haven't, because those weren't part of the initial phasing that we were planning to bring forward. I don't have 2024 numbers, but they will be close. What I would say is, moving forward as part of the 100% design, that's good to know. If we need to pursue funding to do the entire thing, that's what we can do during, that period in which you can either say, we want to phase these together, do as many as you can, again, keeping in mind that the longer some of this gets delayed, the more challenging it becomes, again, with RPU's maintenance of the existing dam. They either need to know, are we sticking money into this dam to do the large project or not,
So I'll just
so we don't want to
assume.
kick it
yeah.
out too much farther, and a continually bigger project can create delays.
Good. All good points. I'm still focused on the 17th and get what we can, and it's extra credit if we get more, and if we can't, I understand.
Thanks, Mr. Keen. Mr. Parrish?
Sorry, there we go. Wonderful. We have had some light conversation at the staff level, and I think responsive to your inquiry is, we could bid out the trail segments as alternates to the project, and you could evaluate the cost at the time of the award of bid. It would sort of then have to be rolled into this next design contract. And again, just to reiterate, they're doing a lot of prep work and initial grading and things, but you likely could see some efficiency with the pricing if you're fully mobilized in for that work and you're really just coming on the backside with, whatever pavement, application you're gonna have. So that's certainly something that could be looked at, is just bidding the pedestrian features as alternates, and then you could make the, decision at the time of award if it was appropriate or not, and we could find the resources to do it, and it gives us a little more runway to pursue that external funding as well. But linking the funding up, is an important piece of that.
Mayor Norton.
Just quickly, I wanted to thank the staff for all the community engagement that's been done. There was some done quite some time ago. Then I held kind of an interim one because we were hearing that we needed more community engagement. More time has passed. And I was really impressed with the level of information that was shared, that the questions were answered. So I wanted to thank you for your meeting the other night. I did not attend this afternoon's, but I did attend the one the other night and was really impressed with what I saw. So I want to thank you all for your commitment to that, answering questions and community engagement. And the one topic that I'm a little uncomfortable with that I don't want to leave unanswered, which has to do with safety. As someone who does kayaking, I can tell you when I kayak on the lake, I steer far clear of getting anywhere near that dam. So one of the reasons we don't have accidents is because people don't go near the dam because it's dangerous and it's frightening. This riffle dam and the new configuration will allow the dam to be not only be able, the water to be utilized for much further down in that direction. We will be able to, as kayakers, I don't know how much longer I'll be kayaking, but younger people, kayaking over the riffle dam into another part of our lake that will finally be accessible. And I think that's true of other people on canoes and paddle boats as well. So I think this actually will open up, and not only will it create a safer area, I just don't want us to say, because no one's died at this point, that safety isn't an issue. And I kind of have heard that intimated a couple times, and it isn't that. The reason we don't have deaths are manyfold, but one of which is people stay away from the dam, and that part of the lake isn't very usable. Just wanted to add that.
Sure. Thanks, Mayor. I think there have been some really great comments and questions brought up, and appreciate Councilmember Palmer's line of questioning. I do think it is important to clear up some of this misinformation that's going around and make sure that we are very transparent in what the process has been and what it will be. And your team has done a really wonderful job. You are incredibly responsive to emails that are coming in or other questions, and trying to be proactive and staying on top of getting the right information out. So thank you to your team. It's really been a pleasure to work with you. Councilmember Palmer, wrap us up.
Yep, thank you. And I agree that your presentations were good and the questions that you took were great. So I had kind of an aha moment sitting here. If we have 89 flood control money and we're going to spend 5.2 of it for dredging, a large portion of our trail system was paid for by the flood controls from 89. So basically what you're saying is that the North Trail would use some, if not all, of the money, or the pedestrian bridge could be used because it's adding to the flood control trail system. Do you understand what I'm saying? You have a pot of money, the $89. We're going to use 5.2 million of it to dredge. You're going to have a remainder of the $89, which I don't know what that dollar amount is. Could you then apply that to the trails that you're talking about?
So one, extension of the trails and maintenance of the trails within the existing network is an eligible use because those were all part of the original project. Now, as we communicated during the referendum and leading up to that, we do have a capital plan in which those reserves had largely already been budgeted out through 2029. And so part of your question gets at, have those funds been essentially earmarked for other projects, and I don't have that memorized. So I can look at that between now and the 17th to look at other projects that are needed and where this one might fit in comparison as we again look at other funding sources for the pedestrian components of this project. So
Thank you.
I guess Councilmember Wall is going to wrap us up.
Thank you. A few points. I appreciate the talk about safety and from Mayor Norton. Sure, we haven't had a death here, but I've looked it up and there were 111 deaths between 2018 and 2020 at Lowhead dams. Because we haven't had one doesn't mean it's not dangerous. In the same way that none of us has been driving at the time of a fatal accident, it doesn't mean we're not going to accept more safety features in our newer automobiles. So I think safety can be an important part of trying to prevent problems. I appreciate Councilmember Keen's trying to expand some information for this coming Monday night. And my question to the council is, what information do we need so that Monday night does not become, next Monday night, doesn't become a rehearsal of all the same things that we've been talking about, but that we can really move together as a council on a comprehensive decision that really has a great deal of public interest. So are there pieces of information? I realize there's probably going to be a huge part of the packet that will offer some more details for us. But what is it that we need so that we can move ahead and not argue about 750 feet or something?
I think staff have done a great job of responding to our questions today and have a sense of what information we're interested in. And I think we're on the right track, it sounds like. Is there something you're waiting on?
Part of what, and I think that I'm part of why we're doing this today is that I yearn for council members to, instead of debate with staff, that we have an opportunity to visit with one another and move ahead so that even if we can't entirely agree, we can, again, not dwell on perhaps specifics that could be argued, but in terms of a total project that may or may not add to the quality of life in Rochester. That's pretty obtuse, I realize.
Speaking my language, definitely.
For my part, I think the voluminous exposition today was useful.
Councilmember Keith?
If I'd add just, I mean, I mean, again, I think Deputy Administrator Parrish said it right, that you don't want to do anything right now that pushes the decision points out. But I think we should all try to use the staff to sort of say, these are the things that are important to us, so that as best they can, they bring in something on the 17th and have the flexibility to, so that the things that we do think are important or critical would go forward. But I think it is a late date to start talking about changing scoping. And I appreciate the fact that this is how it's laid out right now for phase one. But those other things with the size of the lake or with the idea of like what it would take to bring in and do those projects more efficiently at the same time, if at all possible, and even in the September, October, November, when working with the bids, that we see some way through to that, I think that would be the kind of thing that I think Councilmember Wall was looking for. If that's important to us, we should have it to the staff before the 17th and not, bringing it up there.
Well, I feel very good about that, and I think Aaron is tracking that. Yeah, and we'll do the best with estimates. Otherwise, we have talked about this since 2019, so I think we are moving forward, and it's nice to see that we were awarded the funds and ready to have a discussion to get this going, hopefully. All right, thank you, staff, and let's take a 5-minute break and reconvene at about 5:10.
Recording stopped.
everyone.
Recording in progress.
Right back to Aaron Luckstein to introduce his colleague.
Yeah, thank you. So with me tonight is Matt Baker. He is the project manager for our water reclamation plant, liquid and solids treatment plant upgrade. You've seen him at previous council meetings. So he's been working on this project since 2015. So very knowledgeable on it. We're here to give you another update as we get closer to moving forward to construction. So with that, Matt.
Thank you. Council members, I'm Matt Baker. I work at the water reclamation plant as a project manager there. Just to clarify, 2015 is when we started our permit negotiations. So been here at the city since 2013, working on the project and other projects. But so we had the permit negotiations. They went on for a long time, about 7 years. We also had a facility plan during that meantime, which was approved by council in 2019. And so we this is part of that project that was in the facilities plan. Once again, this is the water reclamation plant. This is the city of Rochester's wastewater treatment plant. And the project is our large liquid and solids upgrade, the $80 million plus project that we have. It'll be coming to council August 5th for final approval. I just wanted to clarify that because there is a smaller project being bid right now at the water reclamation plant. Actually, tomorrow is bid opening. That's not this project. That's a much smaller $2 million project. Just a quick overview. We've got the project, kind of some background. A lot of you have heard this before because it has been around for so long. So a lot of the items have been repeat. But we'll get into current progress hopefully quickly. Some schedules, some financials, and then recommendations that we have to move forward with the project. This is the large project. It does two things for us. It's an upgrade project. It's not an expansion project. So just to clarify, so this doesn't add more capacity to our plant. We get that a lot because it is especially such an expensive project. We do have more stringent effluent limits that this project will meet for us. And it is replacing old equipment. So most of the equipment that we're replacing, it was built in the 1980 big expansion project at the plant. The 1980 project treats about 75% of our treatment plant flow. And so this is replacing most of that 80s equipment, rehabbing some tanks. There is another tank being built to help meet that new effluent limit, but it's not, adding more capacity. We do have enough capacity through 2045. So just, it's not, so we do have capacity through 2045. The project does reduce energy and chemical quite a bit. So we'll save about $650,000 a year in current dollars. Chemical has gone up a lot. It fluctuates a lot. So it could be more, it does go down sometimes too. So it could be less, but roughly $650,000 we'll save every year once this project's complete. Okay. So what is the project? Basically, this is a map of our kind of aerial view of our plant. All the little circles and squares that are colored, that's where all the main work is taking place. So it's pretty much the entire plant, right? So we had a project a few years ago that was our kind of remodel project, which was like maintenance, administration. We brought over the sewer crew and stormwater crews. That obviously is not being touched, but pretty much everything else in the plant is being worked on in some way. There are some tanks being abandoned. There is one tank being added, but again, most of it you actually won't see from the surface. You'll see the storage of the equipment on site as you drive by, but all the work, a lot of it's happening in our tunnel system or in the buildings inside. We're not adding any more buildings. There is one basin, like I mentioned, being added. So I won't go over all this because we have had it in several other council meetings, but if there are questions, feel free to ask at any time. So where are we at right now? The project is at 100% design. So we have 100% design drawings and specifications. You may have remembered seeing it already because we asked to go to bid. We went to bid. We had no bidders, 0. The project was too risky for them. And in the wastewater world, most projects right now are having one. You're lucky if you have 2 bidders. So we pulled the project, went back, and last year, the state luckily approved the construction manager at risk process, the CMAR process. It's been around for a long time. Actually, it's just the state had limitations. Met Council has some authority to use that process. We didn't. You could have got special But regardless, it's approved now. We can use it. We went back, put it out on the market for that process. We had 4 people interested. We selected one that was brought to council, and we hired Adolphson and Peterson out of the Twin Cities as the, as our CMAR contractor. So that's kind of where we're at. We do have Minnesota Pollution Control Agency approval on the drawings because again, we were actually bidding it. Building Safety has initial review and comments, and we're sending that actually tomorrow to them for the final approval of that project. We've had value engineering done a few times now because we have been, bid it again. So we've gotten feedback from contractors. And so that's been helpful to help reduce costs. But we'll get into it later that we are over budget. So the current schedule, basically we have the contract with the contractor. We went out, asked suppliers and subcontractors for estimates. So we're complete with that stage. We're currently have it bid right now to subcontractors. So because we were at 100% design, we're doing our guaranteed max price with the construction manager at risk. So a construction manager at risk is CMAR and the guaranteed max price is GMP. We're doing a little differently than some other projects you might see at the city with the CMAR process. They'll do a guaranteed max price without actually the bids to the subcontractors and suppliers. Because we're at 100%, we can actually go and hard bid it to all of them ahead of time. So we'll actually know exactly our GMP and our contingency will be less and the risk is less than as well. So it's kind of better for us. It's kind of better for us. So that was brought to you guys, the initial contract from CMAR. We're looking to bring the actual GMP, the guaranteed max price to August 4th. That'll actually be into the contract with the city. Right away, August 19th. Hope to have the cryo plant down. That's our cryogenic oxygen plant down by July of 2025. It's supposed to be down May of 2025. We got approval to keep it moving. It might fail at any time, but we have talked to our consultants and the safety risk of that failure is minimal. So we are going to continue to run that plant until it does eventually fail. So that's hopefully that gets us through July 2025, knock on wood. Then obviously this project is large. It's going to take 2.5 years. So October 2026 is when the substantial completion and December final completion date. So it's a 2.5-year project. The biggest push and the biggest amount of work is through July 2025. And then there's another big kind of chunk going through September of next year as well. Financials. We are currently listed in the capital improvement plan at the city at $84 million. We do have, we are pursuing grant funding, point source implementation grant funding of $8 million. We are approved to receive that if the bonding bill at the state passes. So it did not pass last year or this year. So we don't actually have that in hand, but we're working on that. There's some other options for that as well. We are approved to get state loan financing through the PFA, Public Facilities Authority. That's really good for us because we only pay interest as we draw the money out and the loan interest rate's low. So right now it's 2.4%. So that is good for us because our rate study had 3% as our projected amount, which is also low, but we knew we were getting this funding. So 2.4% is really good loan rate. Expenditures to date, we've spent $5 million out of our retained earnings, I guess, out of our sewer enterprise fund account. That will not be reimbursed through a loan. We planned that just to have that paid for us out of our retained earnings. We did go through 2 rounds of value engineering. So we've got roughly 11 million here either just recently within the last couple months or kind of at like 50-70% design. We did all our value engineering obviously during the facilities plan back in 2019. but this was, you know, the more recent. The current project is estimated at $89 million. That's the construction component. So we had 84 million in the CIP. We've spent 5 million, and now we're looking at, we need 89 million. So that leaves a $10 million gap, right? 84 million minus the 5 million we already spent, leaves 79 million. 89 million is what it's gonna take. We do have some bid alternates for the project. So we have our odor scrubber building. It's an air scrubber building that's estimated around $2.3 million. That's a bid alternate that we can take out if we choose to. We have some weir covers that are, we can take out, and then we've already deleted some other components of the project that aren't necessary to meet our permit. You know, what's in our permit. So this project's, you know, in our permit with the state. And so I can't like remove the aeration basin, right? That's one of the more expensive things. You know, the piping is estimated, just the materials around 14 million, you know, to kind of put it in perspective. You know, the steel is $2 million. You know, it's big numbers and just materials and labor for this project. So we have some good news. Our retained earnings is roughly $10 million. I did not plan that. Higher than the rate study projected. So it does, we do have that in retained earnings at $10 million. The loan interest is also lower. So that saves us about 5 million total over the course of the project, having that lower 0.5% interest rate on that loan. So basically we've looked at it. We've done the bid alternates. We've met with the contractor. You know, we're going to be coming back on August 5th. I'm going to open up to questions here in a little bit, but I'd like, you know, staff's, you know, rough, you know, council members rough nod that we can keep moving on this. Because obviously at August 5th, if you were to vote it down, that's a big change to pretty much this whole 10-year path. And so that's kind of why we're here today, just to, you know, discuss with each of you. And obviously there's gonna be questions because some of you council members weren't here back when we did all this. And so I'm kind of opening up to questions or concerns and I should note that this does not change then our customers' rates from what we have projected, because we do have that extra savings already there. And so it has no impact on the ratepayers' rates from what we have projected in the rate study.
I love that you just found an extra $10 million and you're like, good news, we found the extra $10 million.
It looks like it was, yeah, it was not planned. It just, it is there. Some of that reason why we have the extra amount was we have more interest on our balance than what the rate study projected. We were projecting only about $1 million a year, and we've earned almost 2 million a year. Dale with finance, before he left, refinanced one of our loans, and we paid off one of our loans that was variable interest. And so that refinancing saved us a lot, actually. The other loans we have are all done in 2026, and there's no early call date on those, so we have to pay those and all the interest that's left.
Okay, so my question was there another planned use for those funds, or is this really the best
No.
use?
Nope, there was no other plan used because it was either operating savings that we've seen through some other chemical savings or energy savings, or just budget savings in general that we've been implementing, or the money earned on interest, or some of that loan refinancing that was, you know, some of it was in the rate study, but some of it was not, just the way that they refinanced during that rate study.
Okay, great news. Mayor Norton.
So can I,
Oh, sure.
two things, just because I was looking at facial
Yeah.
reactions there. So one, keep in mind, cryogenic oxygen plant, we produce our own pure oxygen on site, and that's what we use in the wastewater treatment process. We always have a plan B, and that is liquid oxygen. So we have that on site. So if the system fails, we'll have to use liquid oxygen. I saw some of the looks across the room.
That one slide by.
So the risk then is on the treatment side, not if it fails. There's a public risk. It's the ability to still treat wastewater. We'll use liquid oxygen. Matt had mentioned like bid alternatives. So the odor scrubber, I think as you know, the community has grown around us, so odor control is a very, very important part of our job to be good neighbors. That's a huge priority. So, we want to make sure that we're still able to be good neighbors as part of that. Removing that doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be an increase in odors. It just does make it a little more challenging with how we will ensure that odor control, again, dealing with aging equipment. And then Matt, you covered the other on I wanted to emphasize that again, if we were to use those overages, not an increase in rate, in our rates, impact to ratepayers. So.
That air scrubber
Yeah.
was my other question, so, good.
And just to clarify on the odors, that odor scrubber building is there now, and we are treating those odors now with existing scrubbers. The issue is they're not sized for the other areas we're gonna be treating, and so the airflow rates, they'll be at a reduced effect, I guess. The blowers can only operate at such, flow rate, so they
Okay.
won't be treating so much.
And so the 89 million does include that 2.3 million for the odor scrubber building
I'd like
renovation?
to say yes, but
Approximately.
given the bidding
Oh, boy.
environment, I can't be sure on that. I mean, we're getting.
Aaron's panicking.
The question is that $2.3 million part of the 89, or are we talking 91.3? Is that your question?
Yeah, and he's saying approximately.
I'm saying approximately, and,
Okay.
and the reason I say that is, they sent it out to different subs to give us an estimated price, but some of them couldn't get back to us in time, right? So.
Oh, sure.
So we're doing the best we can, but, we may have missed some structural steel for pipe supports, for instance. We have an estimate in there right now. We could be way off. I don't think we are, but.
I would just say that the key is that it is a bid alternate. So whether that comes in at 2.3 million or 3.5 million, it is a future decision to determine whether or not it makes sense to
Yeah.
continue to move forward regardless of price.
I got that. Okay.
Yeah, and if it really is gonna put us over, I could put that in the council packet as, the option, because you have the option to do the two alternatives.
Sure, that makes sense. Okay, Mayor.
Who would have thunk we have so many questions about wastewater treatment?
Well,
it's a big
project.
A couple things. One, you mentioned bidding and there was no bonding, I'm not bidding, bonding. There was no bonding bill. Is this going to come forward in a future bonding bill? Is it still something we're going to seek? And is there a way to seek more than we've asked for in the past? Given the-
Yes,
given the
there's a
increases.
few, the point source implementation grant funding
Mhm.
is a program that's already in place, and we're already approved to receive that fund, but there is so many projects that have already also been approved to receive that funding. And so we need, I think it's estimated around $100 million before it gets to us on the list. And so if the state doesn't approve that, then we don't have that funding available to us.
Yeah, so unfortunately, Points Implementation Grant has been underfunded the past few years based on the number of projects that are coming forward in order to, that grant is set up to help pay for unfunded mandates, new limits that are going in permits, and it's been underfunding. So we've been in communications with Public Facilities Authority. As you know, we are active in our legislative efforts the last couple of years to advocate for a fully funded PSIG. And so this upcoming session, we would need them to not only cover the backlog of projects that are in there, but then also the projects in the queue for 2025 and 2026. The good news that our project is estimated to be 30 months. And so as long as we still have a project up until that funding is available, we have a little more flexibility than some of the other cities that only have a one-year project, things like that.
And the PSIG grants do have a cap, and I believe it is the $8 million.
Right now, it's $7 million.
So we've asked for more
but-
than the cap.
And
So-
are we asking for the cap up at
Yeah.
to the cap?
Yes, and we are
Okay.
eligible for the cap. Yep. So two different things. So one, the cap is 7 million. We are eligible for the full cap. We actually have 21 million that would be eligible, but the cap, so there's plenty of cushion there.
That was my point is,
Yep.
I'm happy to help with this next year, number one. But also we may need to ask for a change in the legislation to perhaps increase the cap at the same time so that we might be eligible for more.
Correct.
So
Yep.
both. And part of the argument would be that costs have increased since we started this discussion, since I've been mayor, we started at around 60 million. We're now at 89, right? I mean, everything has gone up. And we can ask the state for that consideration as well as part of that lobbying effort. Okay, so that was one thing. Good. Second thing is PFAS, which as I understand it, nothing that we're doing here. This is strictly upgrading the current process and is not addressing the new PFAS regulations, which were just approved. Is that correct?
So correct that the project does not address PFAS.
Mm-hmm.
So
And the EPA just approved limits for drinking water. And we're expecting more regulation. They do give you a timeline to implement changes.
So.
Are you
the-
expecting anything coming in that line?
So the regulations that were recently approved, so there's two things. One is drinking water,
Mhm.
different than wastewater. So
wastewater.
on the drinking water side, that's the source side. So that's what those regulations are. The other thing, so that doesn't directly
Mhm.
impact us, other than the water that people use comes to our facility as it goes down the drain. So the more PFAS in the source water, the more PFAS coming to our
Mhm.
plant. And we've been working with RPU closely on that. The other thing that they passed is PFAS, two components of PFAS, PFOA and PFOS are now listed as hazardous substances
Mhm.
under the Resource Recovery Act. So hazardous waste regulations, again, not directly impacting us, but something we are watching and being mindful of to make sure that those don't get applied to us, or if they do, that we're ready for
Yeah.
that. So.
And we've been working on that, and I have too, but I guess I want to bring this up because there's definite interest in the EPA and in others to perhaps put some more regulations out there beyond drinking water. And if so, what we're doing here, I just want to lay the groundwork, because if that happens in the next few years and they give you some years to work it, I think they're giving drinking water 5 years to work out, getting it out of drinking water 100%. If they would do that, we're saying around 100 million or give or take, in addition to what we're doing here. So it's not that we're doing anything wrong here. We're spending $89 million to build a wastewater treatment plant that we need to replace one that's aging, but we could be asked in the future, and some of you, may not pay attention or be here for this issue in the future. I know. Look at Brooke and she keeps smiling. But it is possible that we would have to come back and ask for more in the future because the laws are changing, the rules are changing, and it's completely outside our control and there's nothing we can do about it. And it's this amount or more in the future. So I just wanted to put that out there. We're all watching it. It's a little frightening, actually. And the last thing is, this is a positive thing about our wastewater treatment plant that I would love to end on. Do we not do a lot of producing our own energy for the running of the facility? I think it's a good story to tell, and if we could just quickly touch on what you do in a positive way to run your plant.
Yep. You want me to cover that, or you want?
Thanks for ending on an upbeat note after that middle one. Okay.
Yeah, we produce about 500 homes worth of power with our own generation. We collect methane gas off our digesters, burn that in our generators. In the winter time, we do need that for heat, so we burn that through our boilers, produce pretty much all of our own heat on site as well. And then we do heat recovery with our wastewater. We recover about 5 million BTUs an hour from our wastewater. Summertime, we're kind of putting heat back into the wastewater because we're cooling our equipment. But in the wintertime, we're pretty much using that wastewater as a preheat, heat exchange with some glycol systems to preheat our air at our facility. And we use a lot of air to, ventilate the tanks per code and per standards, so.
And as Matt it fluctuates, throughout the year, but about 45% of the energy used on site, we produce on site. So.
Excellent. Councilmember Keen?
Yeah, again, just, it's kind of daunting when you think of these dollar figures, but I remember in 2019 when this came up, and I think this is an important point. We talk about these enterprise funds, but it should go without saying, but our residents pay these on their utility bills month after month, and I feel it's a good job here that we seem to be managing that enterprise fund well, and it's helping pay for things like this. Mr. Baker, you make the point about we're doing technology upgrade as opposed to a capacity upgrade. And that's important too. And I'm glad we're like looking ahead before things start failing that we're doing this. The fact that it's been over 5 years and there's costs changing in that 10, 20% range is bothersome a little bit, but at the same time, these kind of things with recent inflation, I think it's understandable. As far as, it's an odd sort of capacity question. You mentioned we're good until, I think you said 2045.
Yes.
How does a city like Rochester decide that we're going to be centralized for water treatment versus distributed? It seems to me that we are centralized and being very efficient at it, but I think we cause some of our city growth problems by being so centralized. Can you talk through just if we did hit 2045, why would we do all of our capacity upgrades in one location, or would we start a second plant?
No, one location, 100%.
But talk about I mean, is
Yeah,
that,
so, let's use Orinoco as an example.
I was thinking something
Right.
more in the 200,000 population range.
Yep, yep.
That,
The more plants you have to maintain, the more staff you have to have.
Yep.
The
It's
more,
an
you're
efficiency.
gonna, yep, you're gonna have energy inefficiencies because you gotta run certain equipment, HVAC equipment that is already included in all of our infrastructure right now. So your cost goes up significantly, both in chemical, energy, labor.
I mean, that plant must be, as an asset, must be worth.
It's around 600 million.
Yeah.
yeah.
So we don't want another one.
I guess I'm challenging that though, because I mean, I haven't heard that the people in Orinoco pay 5x to do water treatment than what the resident in Rochester does. Stewartville does water treatment for 5,000 people. How come they can do it and we can't set up distributed?
So Orinoco will be paying probably about double what we pay a month in rates. So if we were to distribute it, if you wanted to do those customers in that area, they'd be paying a lot more. Or everybody else would have to pay for it, right? So and subsidize that area, so.
Okay.
It is significantly more expensive.
Yeah.
Plus, you gotta think of your discharge, right? You have to discharge that clean water. And
Yeah.
that clean water, you have to go get a permit for that, or you have to pump it back to your plant that you have.
Yeah,
now.
I think I've done what I want to do. I just want to bring it up. I expect it's efficiency. I thought there might be other sort of controls, but it also does constrain the growth of our city. We're not growing in certain areas right now, mainly because of sewer capacity. And that has an effect on our growth. And if it were other ways that we could solve that, I would be interested in it.
Thanks for that, Councilmember Keen, Councilmember Palmer.
Kind of go off of Mr. Keen.
great.
It's not the plant that's keeping us, it's different lines that are coming into Rochester's sewer plant that we have the bottlenecks at.
Correct. We have capacity constraints within our collection system. We have capacity at the water.
It's not the plant.
So it's getting it there.
Just a couple quick questions, but so we've been working we're replacing things that were built 30 years ago. We think we're gonna not have to do anything if regulations did not change until 2045, and at some point you'll start planning for that. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, most of the equipment's about 45 years old.
Okay.
And if regulations didn't change, we would be fine through 2045 under all of our wastewater characteristics that were permitted on. I will tell you that there is other contaminants coming down the road that we are planning for in this project to be able to treat. But obviously, the more stringent you are on the effluent discharges to the river, basically the more biology or the more tank volume I need. So eventually you have to spend money to grow more tankage. But this project allows us to do that. Our existing trial plant design does not.
Thank you.
So, and I'll add a little bit more just,
Yep.
'cause, so one example, as Matt had said, so one of the future limits that has been discussed for the last few years is nitrogen limits. Right now, we have an ammonia limit, but we don't have a total nitrogen limit. State has been talking about that. Our current plant, we cannot do nitrogen removal to be able to meet a future limit. The project that we're proposing, changing the treatment technologies, would allow us to treat for nitrogen in the future. So we theoretically won't have to do a future project just for that. So we're looking at what potential additional pollutants could be coming in the future and how do we best prepare, for that. keeping in mind that our permit's reissued every 5 years. So it could always change, but we are very active in looking at, working with the state, looking at future limits to best position ourselves. So did I go into too much detail there?
You did. I have a whole lot of questions now, so no. So what I think I just heard you say is that in nitrogen, we're going to be prepared to do it. So would you just do it even if it wasn't required?
Well, so are you
You're
saying
building-
would we
you're building-
voluntarily meet the limit?
Yeah.
So one of the things we will do is, our goal is to reduce pollution as much as we can, remove as much as we can. So yes, once we have that technology, we will start removing nitrogen within reason. There's a cost associated with all of that. So there's always that fine balance. And then looking at more cost-efficient ways to remove pollutants. And so this is the other thing, 20 years, a lot of technologies could change. If you remember, our facility actually just received award about a year ago for doing studies on sludge densification. And ultimately what that came down to is we can treat more wastewater on a smaller footprint than historically what was required. And so when you start doing those things, then you don't have to build bigger tanks. You can utilize the tanks you have, which in theory, generates capacity within the plant, prevents having to do an update. So we'll constantly keep doing those things to continue to advance wastewater treatment technologies for the future.
I think it's just
And that-
also
and-
really important to point out, like, we wouldn't want to meet a limit that doesn't exist because, and I will just point it out ironically, because Mr. Luckstein used to provide limits to treatment plants.
Yeah.
But when you don't know the limit, you really don't know how you can treat it in the way that MPCA will approve. So like if you build in a process, it might not actually meet your permit later on. That's the fun part of working with the MPCA.
Thank you.
Councilmember Dennis.
Thank you. So I just have a couple questions. Having toured the facility, it's magnificent and amazing, a lot of moving parts. Is any of this, and maybe I didn't see this, but for like security purposes, there's a lot of people who are concerned when, society in general, when there's threats to national security. Water is a very, people are really worried about something being tampered with water supply because that could really devastate a community. Is any of this funding going toward increasing security to make sure that there isn't any kind of sabotaging, anything in the future that could potentially cause devastation?
There is some funding. We're adding some cameras. We're adding some secured doors in the project. And then also cybersecurity is a big thing for us. However, we're managing that with our maintenance budget, not with this project particularly, just because that's an ongoing thing. But yeah, nothing else in the project.
That's just a concern I know some people have brought up to me, and I feel that always good to have on the radar of, the what if kind of prevention. And then my other question is kind of a firsthand experience. My family turned on the tap and it was brown water, and in my head correlated it to a storm that had just happened, and I called and they said, well, this is routine. We do I can't remember the details, but RPU said something about flushing and the water turned brown, and it was kind of, I hadn't seen that happen where, all the, toilets and sinks and everything in the house. And they said it was something planned, but I wasn't informed. I didn't hear about it in any way, shape or form. And they said I could bring some water in to get it tested, but is any of that, I guess, just in a broader sense for people who may have also experienced that happening with their tap, do people come and test the water, or is there any way of notifying residents that maybe with changes, I just wanted to see if something can be done in the future. So like my kids drink the water out of the sink, the faucet in the sink in the kitchen. And it was really a huge thing for me. I was wondering if any of this is going to address that kind of issues that have been occurring.
So drinking water is under the responsibility of Rochester Public Utility. They are the water
I'm
drinking
so
water
sorry.
entity.
Yep.
And it often is confused, water reclamation, but that is the wastewater treatment side. So we are part of the wastewater treatment facility, not drinking water. So it'd be best to direct that question.
Okay,
to
I'm so
Rochester
sorry.
Public Utility.
I apologize. So. Thank you for the information.
So that's a great question. Actually, the information goes out in the RPU Connect magazine that they send out monthly. And what that actually is when they flush the hydrant, it stirs up some of the iron deposits. And so it's just temporary in the system. And they usually also have something on the website. And if people just call the customer connect line, like sounds like you did, then they usually provide that information and they know every hydrant that they have flushed. And if you're in the area, they can assure you that, as long as you run the water for a certain amount of time, that will get that iron and mineral deposits through the system and wouldn't be an issue again until they flush again.
All right, well, thank you so much for the great update and we'll see you in August for sure. Okay, thank you, Matt.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. Good job talking for almost 2 hours. Yeah. Oh, all right, we have Taryn Edens. Are you introducing yourself?
Sure.
All
happy to do
right.
So. Let's see here. Awesome. All right. Good evening, council members, council president and mayor. Taryn Edens with the Community Development Department. Today, I'm here to give you an update on the Economic Vitality Funding bucket, if you will. So my goal for you or for this presentation is really twofold. One, I'm seeking input, feedback, provide on direction on the allocation of resources specifically for affordable housing initiatives. The other, you're being proposed a goal or suggestion of strategically investing in housing in the near term. So the other ask is to support that goal. So quick context, I think you're all familiar, but for the public record, we were talking about sales tax renewal projects. This was passed in November. This is brought up a couple times in the previous presentations today. Specifically, we're going to be talking about the Economic Vitality Fund in which $50 million was approved. Reminder, that's for over the course of time. We anticipate that could be spent over 16 years or so. Recently, we collected about $15 million annually. So we would anticipate collecting about $3.3 million annually for Economic Vitality Fund. So keep that number in mind. I'm going to be referring to it again, 3.3 million. So economic vitality specifically, what we're talking about. I know you are also familiar with this, but just a reminder, we're calling it economic vitality because we recognize our economy and economic vitality is an ecosystem in short, right? So that includes workforce and business development, but we also know that housing is a huge component of that. So housing is certainly the focus of this funding. And I'd like to point your attention to how it'd be recommended to allocate the $50 million. So these numbers have changed slightly. So you'll notice that 33 million is recommended for housing creation specifically, 6 million for housing preservation, and 11 million for workforce and business development. And that is throughout the course of this fund, right? So it could be 16 years. So if you were to ask me, how would I want to spend this funding for each of these buckets, here are some proposals, if you will. So let's look at housing creation first. I'm going to go over this kind of high level, and then I will parse down as we go later. So keep that in mind. So housing creation, recommending to allocate $33 million to this one. So a big ticket is the infrastructure investment bucket of recommending about $18 million. So once again, this is over the lifetime of the fund. In short, what we know is it takes a lot of capital to make a dent in this space. I'll talk about it more, but essentially consider infrastructure and how it supports housing specifically. The next is contribution to a housing trust fund. So re-upping a commitment we already make to a collective fund to support various housing needs, and I'll talk about this more. And the next is affordable housing fee relief, and also a big ticket there, $14 million is recommended throughout the lifetime. This would be the home ownership creation program, I'll mention that, and other ways that we can provide general subsidy support the creation of housing, whether that's primarily owner occupied or rental opportunities for affordable rental when they arise. Okay, next high level overview is housing preservation and support. One of these I'll talk about a bit more because it's not planned for the next 5 years. Housing rehabilitation, recommending to allocate $4 million. And really, I mean expansion of housing rehabilitation, and I'll talk about that. First Homes contribution, recommending to invest $1 million in that community partner, which certainly aligns with City Council's priority of creating homeowner opportunities. And this partner in particular creates affordable options in perpetuity. The third one is recommending to allocate $1 million in increasing density construction loans. What is that? It could be a myriad of things, but essentially the idea and what we hear, particularly around financing accessory dwelling units or ADUs, that securing financing is the biggest barrier. We have a pilot program. We have a pending applicant now. We haven't made any rewards yet, but finding ways to provide financing mechanisms specifically for increasing density. Another example would be an existing homeowner wanted to take their single family dwelling and convert it to a duplex. It was allowed, cost them about $10,000 just to meet the code requirements of adding fire separation and things of that nature. So essentially a way to just kind of incrementally add density where allowed would be the vision of that program. Third is workforce and business development. So we would certainly be working, just noticing that the words got jumbled there, but we would be working with potential partners in this space, that being Ready, Workforce Initiative, and Collider. That's the one you can't see. So lifetime of the fund recommending to allocate 5.5 million to adaptive reuse, which I'll discuss, but that's something that council just recently approved that supports our downtown historic district. But notice that it also supports housing opportunities, right? So it highlights that one of the goals of that funding source is to support adaptive reuse of commercial or otherwise into residential. So supports both business owners and housing. The next two are sort of specific, if you will, and they both recommend $1 million towards them, but looking for opportunities for diversifying or creating workforce is one goal, and that's intended to be flexible funding. And the next is entrepreneur support specifically. So entrepreneurs and small businesses specifically looking to provide support to those needs. And the last is a set aside for business development in Rochester, and I'll talk about that, but that's re-upping a contribution we already make and recommending 3.5 million towards that bucket. Okay, so that was the high level overview. I want to take a moment on this slide. So what I'm providing next is basically a proposal for what we should do in the next 5 years and seeking feedback on that. So we'll call this phase 1. Essentially, what I'm recommending here is strategically investing now and early on. It's been said before, 3.3 million is a lot, but it isn't a lot. And if we hope to make a dent in our housing needs, a large capital investment would help, right? So you'll probably seeing these numbers at first, right, and wondering, 2024 and 2025, recommending allocating 7.9 and 10.7 respectfully, which as you would acknowledge is more than 3.3 annually, right? So with that, we would have to solve for that gap, which could be a number of ways. It could be internal borrowing, it could be bonding, it could be committing funds, which means we're going to commit them and pay them when we get them, sort of a situation. So that would be solved for, and that would come back to council. But this is our recommendation so that we can plan for this and proceed with how we would like to fund projects as they come forward. And you'll notice 2026 onward, debt service is listed, so we can continue to collect as well as repay what we had borrowed, if you will. So that would be factored in going forward. A lot of those funding recommendations are for the creation of housing. So specifically, we know we have many needs in our community, right? Housing is a continuum, housing is a spectrum. But we know that there are big gaps in creating home ownership opportunities, specifically in our housing supply needs in general. So with that, it is recommended to strategically invest in the creation of housing and infrastructure, certainly with opportunities to support those other buckets as well. So once again, keep that in mind. There are different goals you could have with this sort of funding. I'm recommending to strategically spend money up front to have a dent in our housing supply needs. You could also opt to spend money quickly. So think about that, what the goal is with the funding, but I would recommend to be strategic to impact our housing needs. So we're calling this phase 1 or the next 5 years. So that is about $28 million. I'm going to go backwards to see if I can see it here. So $28.5 million, and that includes debt service, right? So on the next slide, that takes out that 2.7 million of debt service. So it comes to about 25.8 million in the next 5 years, which is a lot of our funding, right? But once again, recommending this to actually have a dent in some of the housing units that can be produced. So recommending to allocate 21 million towards housing creation, 1.5 towards preservation, and then 3.3 towards workforce and business development. And then I'll go into what would you do with that, Taryn, in the next 5 years. we would be measuring how these funds work, right? How do we measure what are we getting from these investments? So this goes through some of the things we would take a look at. So naturally, number of units produced, how many are affordable to those at a certain area median income or below. Some of our investments are hoping to make land available for development, right? We have lots of opportunities to leverage funding as well. So those are a few things that we would measure in addition to how we'd measure existing housing locations and workforce and business development. So getting into the details, affordable housing fee relief, it was named this way specifically, but it should support the homeownership creation program, which I'll talk about, but it should also support new affordable rental opportunities. So at the last council meeting, thank you to the council who supported East Side Apartments with a contribution, right? That was a project in which our typical tool of tax increment financing or TIF would have been feasible, but due to property tax changes, which is in favor of that project, it made it less of a tool for applying for tax credits, right? So our contribution helped them to score. So we want to consider those opportunities when they come up to support affordable rental properties. And that's why we wanted to keep this sort of loose to support both those situations as well as the home ownership creation program. So I'm sure you've got this memorized, but the homeownership creation program, as a reminder, is there to support for sale housing opportunities, and they have to be priced at $426,100 and below. That number changed. It was $429,000. We just got 2024 income limits, and they went down slightly. So that number is reflective of that, and that's the beauty of having a dynamic number. It can reflect our community's income levels. So the same opportunity to qualify for this exists. If a for sale dwelling is built at that value, they can apply for fee reimbursements up to $20,000 for any fees paid. Or if you're proposing a large subdivision of 50 units or more, you can apply for an upfront subsidy. And with that, we require a certain number of the units be at that price point of 426 or below, and the rest can be up to 500,000. Really trying to encourage high volume due to our high needs of housing supply in our community. How's it going so far? We've got 40 housing units supported to date. We have supported four local builders. 254,000 has been allocated. We have about 245,000 remaining. That's because you recently approved funding for this program. And I would say that we're anticipating a lot of applications. So I won't put the numbers out there, but there's a reason we ask for this, I guess I would say. We're also finding that when subdivisions are supported, it's being leveraged by other funding sources like the Coalition for Rochester Area Housing. So in our opinion, this program is working and helping with our supply. And specifically, this is a picture of a project. I thought I had notes here that we supported. So many thanks to you and the council for this. It's a 2-bedroom, 2-bath in Pebble Creek. This project just received about $6,300 in fee reimbursements, and they actually just use that towards down payment assistance, which is one way that they can use the funding. Next is infrastructure investment. So you're seeing the growth management map update. That work is continuing. It's come before you. And we're really just keeping this on your radar. We don't have an exact project with this funding and it would need council approval. Part of our intent is to invest in infrastructure. So that could be sewer extension or making the pipes larger, or it could be roads, right? So keep it in mind that it's not limited to just sewer expansion or extension. There we go. There are a number of things in the capital improvement plan specifically, and you could support some of those projects that are not otherwise supported with this funding in partnership with Public Works. So this will be coming back to council, and we're identifying that there could be something in the next year. We don't have anything for you today, but just wanted to keep that in mind that this is a great way the funding can support our housing needs by reducing a barrier that we hear about often, that infrastructure is a financial burden to, or barrier, if you will, to creating housing as well. And it has a high capital need to meet as well. Contribution to a housing trust fund. So what is a housing trust fund? It's basically a flexible funding source that can be used to support housing. A lot of communities in Minnesota have them. The state has legislation where they'll match contributions to a degree if you create one. The city is essentially already doing it with the Coalition for Rochester Area Housing, but it's a way to just name it to consider some benefits. So just as well, we certainly want to re-up our investment in that fund to support a variety of housing needs. So keep that in mind. A lot of our investments are going to for sale housing, but the coalition, for example, does a lot of work to support multifamily and other levels of affordable housing. housing rehabilitation. So like I said, we do recommend expanding our housing rehab program. We've had a program around since about 1983 to support for sale housing and keeping them in our community. We've recently explored rental rehab needs, and there are many. It has a higher price tag with rehabilitating and preserving our rental communities, and it takes a bit more project management as well. So we do see that being an opportunity to invest in our existing naturally occurring affordable housing to provide rehab support. We also see opportunities to expand this program through electrification of affordable housing, considering an exterior paint program and a tool lending library. So there's lots of ways we could really expand in the housing rehab world to support and preserve our existing housing. Next is First Home's contribution. So we recommend allocating $1 million for this. This is actually outdated to date. The Community Land Trust has 275 homes in the Community Land Trust. So I think you're all familiar, but just a reminder that it is for sale housing that is kept in a land trust in perpetuity, which keeps it affordable in perpetuity. Recently, they shared with me that the average income level supported by this is actually under 50% of the area median income, which is amazing. So certainly a partner that we would want to support that aligns with council priorities. $1 million investment could support 6 to 12 homes, depending if they're existing or new build. So something to keep in mind. Adaptive reuse program, you've seen this recently, so we're recommending 1.6 million, which is the same that was shared with you. So it's for historic property maintenance as well as a pre-renovation grant, and there's opportunity to expand this program once again to support conversion for upper story businesses to residential. Economic Development Fund is an existing fund that the city has contracted with Ready. So this is an existing one that we're just recommending once again to re-up that investment to support local businesses in the community. So that was a lot. I wanted to give you an idea of what we're recommending and why, what those programs entail. Keep in mind, this is a study session. Any funding that we would recommend would have to come back to council, would be on a council agenda in some way, shape, or form like we've done in the past. So because it is a sales tax project, it will come back before you. I'm almost finished. I thought I would also touch on some additional tools. So sales tax economic vitality is one tool we have. We have many others. Just for your awareness, this summer we are working on an abatement program. So this is something you've seen before, but we do see this aligned with some of our goals here. So property tax abatement, what does that mean? Essentially, it takes a collection of the property taxes and you can use it for in whatever way, shape, or form. So keep in mind, this could benefit a home in different ways. Each taxing body has the ability to collect this. So the city, the county, and the school district would have to decide. If we were looking at abating both the city and the county property taxes, this gives you a nice visual of a home valued at $326,000 could abate about $14,000 over a 5-year period. So it gives us a share of funding that we could use for different ways. We reached out to other communities in Minnesota to see how they're using them. A lot of them do an annual rebate. So you pay your taxes and then you send it back to the homeowner. We envision a process where we could provide upfront down payment assistance. But once again, with the housing need, we want to provide additional incentive to builders and homeowners specifically, right? And folks that are looking to become first-time homebuyers, what other tools can we provide them for this transition? So that is something we're exploring. The county is also looking into property tax abatement, and we've had this discussion with them. So that's something you might be hearing from us in the near future. All right, that is all I've got. So I'll pause for comments, questions. Thank you.
That was excellent. I'm sure we have lots of good questions. Councilmember Wall?
Thank you. Very informative. How does one decide how much money goes into each of the 10 buckets? Why don't you put $50 million in one bucket? I mean, this is, I mean, a lot of buckets.
Yeah, it's a lot of buckets. I will assure you it's not arbitrary. A lot of input went into thinking about this, looking at what our partners are doing, whether that be the Olmsted County Housing Department, the coalition as well, looking at the Maxfield study, and recently a Tingerthal financial analysis report showed us what some of our needs were if we were to be strategic in our resources. Specifically, they call attention to for sale housing, for example. Infrastructure, for example, is a big one. So looking at the costs of all of our projects and what we could do and what seemed reasonable to have some impact. For sale housing, it's frankly looking at what we've seen come in for asks, what that would produce in units. 18 mil, wish I had the numbers for you. For example, 21 million, if you put all in the homeownership creation program, could support about 500 housing units. It depends. So trying, right, and that's a lot, and we need a lot more than 500 units. So it's trying to be thoughtful about what makes a dent, but what's reasonable. So there's a lot of different, I think, thought that goes into the allocations based on that.
My question was sort of similar about how, as you mentioned, Collider Ready Workforce Development, how you're working with them to make sure that what we are proposing we contribute aligns with what their needs are as well.
Sure. I'll answer that if you want to jump in, right? So we have been meeting with Ready specifically lately to talk about their allocation. Those discussions haven't begun yet with other potential partners, hence we list them, but that is an ongoing discussion of what their need is and what we can contribute. Good.
Councilmember Palmer.
Well, thank you. A couple of questions for you. On the ADUs, is it a financial problem or is it a rule that you have to be an owner occupied parcel?
We hear it's securing financing. That's what we hear. Yeah.
Okay.
So we certainly are keeping track of those inquiries and we'll continue to collect that data and are going to be doing some additional promotion this summer, but we hear it's securing financing.
Okay. Is there a reason that we don't bond? If we're going to bond for the sports facility, why don't we just throw some bonding in and make it a bigger number and use that?
That's an option. So when I was showing you the gap before, bonding is certainly an option to get us to those numbers.
Okay.
I would like to, sorry. Let's turn that on. I mean, I think, you'll have some bonding award at your next meeting next week, and we do have a number of other debt issues that are being considered for the parks maintenance facility. So we always try to manage our overall levels of debt. You certainly could do it with this. I think you also have to take into account the level of staff you have to implement these things. And so a lot of this is fairly time intensive. But we're also very mindful that we have a number of debt issues we're considering. And so trying to manage those, you'll also have some conversation as you get into the RPU 2030 plan. If there's some potential debt issuance associated with that. So at the end of the day, we know the AAA bond rating is an important thing for us as a community, and we do have to manage the number of issuances that we're thinking about. I'm not saying that's the one that tips it over, but when you have the opportunity to pay as you go, it's certainly something that we want to be cognizant of.
I appreciate the notice on that. And so you're going to try and do some of this, and if it doesn't work, you're going to come back and revamp what you're going to do. Is that what I heard?
Yeah, any big changes would come back to the council.
But even if you see something needs to be changed, you're going to try and change it. Okay. First Homes, I'm a big supporter of First Homes, and I just want to make sure everybody understands that. They've done a great job for us in the coalition. You're planning on putting money into that also?
Correct.
Okay. And so the workforce enterprise and the economic development funding, to me, we funded Ready in the past at a certain level. Why wouldn't we fund them and then tell them this is what we want them to do and not have a lot of overhead with people? And so if you had one agency that was in charge of all these little, $1 million, $1 million, why not just give them all of it and say, this is our priorities, please fund these. And that way you don't have all that overhead. Does that make? Wait a second, the mayor wants to speak. Go ahead, Mayor. They didn't know that you were,
Councilmember
Mike.
Palmer had a question.
thank you.
I might phone a friend on this one. Thank you.
Ms. Woodward.
Thank you for the question. I think right now we're still kind of evaluating what is going to make the most sense in that kind of area. And so I think what we want to do is kind of evaluate that entire entrepreneurial ecosystem and what's going to make sense in terms of partners, where there's potential gaps and how we kind of build out all of that. And so that includes all of those partners that have been identified. I think we recognize we still have some work that we need to do in identifying where it makes sense to fund additional programs going forward. So we kind of have general buckets right now and that's something we're going to continue to work on and then bring back to City Council for additional feedback.
I guess what I'm saying is if we've had Ready in the past, if you keep Ready and you say, we want you to work on this and we want you to work on this and let them be the oversight of it, am I missing something on that?
I mean, I think we've identified Ready and a number of other partners. So I think all options are kind of on the table right now. I think what we're trying to do is evaluate what's going to make the most sense for the city of Rochester in terms of that economic development funding, looking at all of those partners and what makes sense. So I think there are a number of different options that we're really looking at, and we just really haven't gotten into all of those details quite yet.
Okay, I'll be interested and see what comes up. Thank
And
you.
maybe if I could just add that It has been a very specific relationship with Rochester area economic development in order to fund base business. And so when we're talking about economic development for more entrepreneurial workforce related development, that would be a new relationship that we would have with them. So I think it's valuable to look at all of those partners and ready in order to understand how the ecosystem can work as best as possible to deliver the best results, recognizing that each has a slightly different area that they're really focused on right now.
Aren't most of them on the same floor at the 318 building?
Correct, but they have very different models and very different sort of
And different boards.
spirits and boards, and there's some complexity to it. So it would be valuable to continue to have that conversation to bring forward the most robust package to the city council. I think that's what the team is saying is they're not looking towards Rochester area economic development for some very specific work, but in the ecosystem of workforce development, what would be the most valuable way to work together in order to have the greatest impact on the community.
Okay, I'll be looking forward to how that works. Thanks.
Councilmember Keen.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, there's actually a lot here. I mean, we start out with the macro view of like these high buckets, and I actually got lost a little bit trying to map it down to the individual next 5 years. A couple of more very specific one on housing rehab. I know it says 4 million, but then it's more of a cadence of $500,000 a year. Can the community absorb that right now? Or, I mean, I always think we're probably going to try to use the same funding models the county uses. Are they changing rules, or how does that like get absorbed into the community?
Mhm. Yeah, so we've certainly been discussing this with the county, right? Expansion specifically. I would say the community is ready to absorb a rental rehab program. We have a high need for that, and that's where I think our partnership is more limited on capacity to respond to that. So I would say yes, and I think for that reason we want to be intentional in how we work to expand so that the community, yeah, that's a fair point, is ready for that. But from the rental perspective, they are.
Okay. I think that's a
Yeah.
key part of the answer
Yeah.
is moving from owner occupied, but are those usually loans or are they grants?
Loans.
Yeah. So again, I've always found those to be difficult to absorb into the community. So I'm glad you're thinking about how that would work, but I think the answer is to expand into rental.
Yeah.
Okay. And then just on there's the different buckets here, but on the housing side, I know we have unique municipal capabilities that coalition partners don't always have. But I guess I was expecting to see coalition language or even Maxfield language on senior housing versus new home ownership. Again, is the move away from that just to be more granular for communication, or is it? If you can get some feedback.
Yeah, I would say that's more intentional, just give you a high level perspective and proposal, but every program that would come forward is where you're going to see what need is this meeting in our community specifically, and how is that parting with other agencies. So yeah, for today's presentation, it was just to be high level, but that would be included in every program that came back.
Okay, I guess that would be my one comment, that if the coalition partners and the coalition leadership are using the Maxfield language, and then we start using another language, I'm but I understand our municipal we have capabilities with fees and that others don't have. So I do understand there's going to be differences. As far as the idea of like the bonding or that other stuff, I do take as a good point that idea that housing, it can't wait for $3.3 million to be absorbed each year. You're going to need a bigger splash. But then the way that worked explained to me for something like the sports thing is that the financing fees are then added on to the amount that the sales tax collects. It doesn't seem like it worked in economic vitality, as we were absorbing it as part of our costs and economic vitality. Is that just because of like what Deputy Administrator Parrish mentioned, since we're not bonding, you can't really do that?
Yeah, that's my understanding. Essentially, it gives us more flexibility, and we can build in the debt service that way versus having to calculate it the way the sports complex is planned for. If folks have anything to add, but I would say we do have a different position if we're not bonding for it, right?
Okay, all right. I just did some quick math here, but it looked like you'd be borrowing somewhere in the range of, I think it was like $12 million. Is that what it was for the first couple of years? And then that 12 million would be serviced for 6.5 years, and that's where come up with the 3.3?
Right.
Okay. Yeah, again, I like the high level breakdown of the idea of using economic vitality for that new housing, existing housing, and other. And the percentages, I'm gonna have to trust the professional staff, but I like the idea that we're looking at the higher level. How it rolls out to the next 5 years, I think I still need some more study.
Sure.
Mayor Norton.
I'll be nice. Just a couple of thoughts that I had listening. So one, and I know Brian's here, but I'm a little nervous, and we keep doing it. So it's not just a one-time thing where we're upfronting things a lot, spending money immediately. It makes me very nervous. For me, maintaining that AAA bond rating is an absolute must. It's what our community is known for. We have a long history of that. And it's kind of like, not while I'm mayor, please don't do this to me. This is super important to me that we maintain this. So I don't want to do anything that will jeopardize our AAA bond rating. So when I see like the park funds or the sports complex or now this, it's like, we're going to borrow money and we're going to spend it really quick, rather than saying, let's spend a year or two planning and not just jump into it feet first. So I'm a little nervous, and I'll just say, I know you've done your homework, and we've got a lot of coalitions that are working on these things. I just want to share my concern for that. And Allison looks like she wants to
I
say
just think
something.
it's important for the public to hear that what we're talking about here is the concern would be if we go out to the market. That's the bigger concern. And we did just have our bond rating call. They just did reaffirm our AAA bond rating. They're aware that we have these projects forthcoming. And part of why it makes sense for us to do a little more due diligence on whether we just go straight out to the market or look internally is that there are some of these buckets, if you will, we're continuing to collect dollars, for example, with the stormwater, where we have existing stormwater and flood control, where we can continue to move forward with those projects and, not where we will be collecting funds that arguably would go there that can get regenerated from an upfront to the housing fund and not be spent until it's necessary in some of those flood control and other areas. So I do think message heard, message that we are always sharing with the rest of the organization about the importance of being cautious about how we're budgeting for things. And also because of the rate of collection we're seeing, and we're starting to see hopefully even more collection. I think that we've been pretty conservative in what we've projected, even on the annual collections. And so that, coupled with the ability to look at the other funding sources that aren't as critical near term in that first 3 years, provides a fair amount of capacity in the sales tax alone.
Okay, so I wanted to make that statement, and I have. The other thing I want to talk about a little bit is, we as a council and as a city have worked a lot on equity as, kind of a grounding factor for us. So as I'm looking at, some of the, particularly the housing, but also the workforce development stuff, I want to make sure that we have, that we're taking an opportunity if it's the right time. And I don't know that it is, but I'm just going to put it out here that many cities are thinking ahead. How do we meet the greenhouse gas goals that we have put in place? How are we going to meet our energy goals that we have put in place? Are there policies and rules that we could be implementing at a time we're going to be spending money in housing to assure that they're built with electricity, or that they're part of a district energy or, right? So just to keep in mind, because we're often talking also about people who have the most fragile incomes here when we're working on housing, that we really keep affordable, energy efficient homes for people that are quality, that also can help us meet our greenhouse gas goals. So I just throw that out there, something we could be thinking about as we're investing in housing. And I guess on the workforce development, the thing I would say is I want us to, these are taxpayer dollars and sales tax dollars. I want them to be recognized as such and not just disappear into someone else's budget that someone's taking credit for spending. These are their tax dollars. And when they get something, I want it to be a city recognized funding source, as I sign contracts all the time that come through for home improvement loans or the processes that we have. And people know they're subsidized by the city of Rochester, which is their tax dollars, right? They're being reinvested. So I want that recognized. I'm really thrilled to see our entrepreneur network really growing in this community. And so I'm hoping we can really focus on entrepreneurship and what that means, and equity is a part of that. And I know for some, kind of watching on the periphery of some of this, that there are members of our diverse community that have a harder time getting loans at the bank, that are having a harder time getting grants when they're out there. And so anything we can do to make sure we're very equitable, again, in distributing these funds would be really important to me. And also that, and I love the revolving loan for businesses. I think that's been a good process, so I don't have any problem with that. But I'm hoping maybe there's some new ideas too that can come forward in particularly the workforce development areas. We as a world post-pandemic are seeing so much change that maybe traditional things and the things we've done in the past aren't the same things that are going to work moving in the future. And so just to keep at least an eye toward flexibility, adaptability, and adjusting to the changing markets and needs would be really nice, rather than allocating it all kind of carte blanche from the beginning. So people are like, ooh, I've got a whole bunch of money to spend, rather than let's really think this through over the years that we have it to make sure we're spending in the right way. So that flexibility. So those are the only things I wanted to add, and thanks for your very thorough presentation.
Thanks for those comments, Mayor. Councilmember Dennis, did you have anything? And then Palmer? Everybody's good?
I'm really thrilled that there's funding coming in. So this is wonderful. As the crisis in housing and needs to be addressed immediately, and of course, thought out very, very thoroughly. To what my concern is, I see one of the slides, and I know there's a setup here with trying to get back for information, but with the people needing these services, the most dire need, how is it being made sure that people are getting these funds? Is they're very complex. There's, of course, waiting lists. There's, I find people that I've talked to who are really struggling, they're working, paycheck to paycheck, multiple jobs, trying to make ends meet, some, very difficult situations. And so when we say, go to this website or fill out this form, I mean, it's incredibly daunting. Is there any kind of funding toward mentorships of, I'm not sure if that's the right word, but to have people help, like spoon feed, like sit down with someone and say, hey, this is, you qualify for this and this, let's help you get those services. You can come here to RPU, and, there's rebates, and you can come to, this and look at rental assistance. And is there any kind of looking at people who will not go and, have the time or the energy to find these programs? Is there some way of helping them really get connected and find out who they are too? Because I think it takes a lot for someone to come and say they have need, and then they just fall between the cracks.
Yeah, certainly.
Thank
That's a great point and a great question. We think we have good resources we can leverage, but certainly we want to monitor the performance of this, right? And it's serving folks that it's intended to. So I think that's something we can always revisit. But mentorship is a great example. The coalition invested in 3 Rivers, and they now have a mentorship program specifically to support BIPOC and new homeowners, which has been great. So we're finding that works. I should quote the numbers. I think they have over a dozen folks enrolled, something to that tune, or they have a dozen mentors, but it's going well. And so that program, for example, we can refer folks who are qualifying for our program, the new home ownership opportunities program, right? New home ownership creation program. We can refer them to 3 Rivers as a place to get qualified buyers. So I do think there are resources out there. Just to your point, the rehab project, a reason it's been so successful, the home rehab program, is we do have a project manager who does hold homeowners' hands, right? So getting the word out there is important. And I think that's also a reason why we want to expand that program, because it does take a lot of capacity, particularly with the rental, because now you have to qualify both tenants and work with an owner. So we agree that that's important, and we consider that where we can, and we'll continue to.
Councilmember Palmer.
Well, thank you. I'll be quick. I think everybody at the city council wants to keep our AAA bond rating. Would never want to get that not to be there. One of the reasons that you do bond, and especially with construction, is construction costs are going to go up. So sometimes you make that decision to bond, which is going to save you on the inflation on the construction, which typically goes up a lot. And I always have to point out that in the state of Minnesota, since the early 90s, we've had the second best energy code in the United States, and we work hard at that. And so we've had a lot of homes built energy efficient. Thank you.
All right. We good? Well, thank you so much for the update. Look forward to hearing more. And I think we will turn it over to Ms. Zelms for the study session schedule update before Mr. Carlson will walk us through adjourning to a closed session. Go ahead.
Certainly. Thank you, Council President, council members, members of the public. Just very briefly, the next council study session is on June 24th. We are hopeful that we will be back in our normal meeting space. We will see. A lot of work happening this week. And I just did want to point out the JEDI audit update. So that will be with Director Motella and the directors of HR, Library, and Parks to talk through some of the audits they've been doing to determine how they might make changes in order to be more welcoming. Downtown task force update. So work that's going to continue to happen in that space. And then the 2023 annual comprehensive financial report presentation. We did have a training listed, but with meaty topics, we are going to work with our teammates to push that back to a little bit later in the year so that you have time to focus on that. We obviously changed a few things around in order to prioritize a couple things on this meeting, and that has kind of impacted the rest of them. So don't want you to be too fearful of that. We'll work on fitting that in a little bit later in the year. We have some times available in September where we could do that. So that's all I have.
Great. Thank you so much. Mr. Carlson.
Good evening, Council President Carlson, Mayor Norton, council members. My name is Brent Carlson, Deputy City Attorney. Tonight, agenda item A5 is an executive session closed pursuant to Minnesota Statutes 13D.05, subdivision 3, parent C, parents 3. This is the type of closed session that does not require a formal motion to move into the closed session. Pursuant to the published agenda, I would invite the council president to move into a closed session in the RPU boardroom at a time you believe to be appropriate to consider the purchase price of properties identified as the following: Seneca Foods Corporation, parcel identification numbers 642-513-087-720, 642-532-087-724, and 642-532-087-722. Rochester West Campus LLC, parcel identification number 742-113-085-447. Richard E. Badger, trustee, parcel identification numbers 752-413-035-211 and 752-411-082-670. And finally, 75th AZ LLC, parcel identification number 752-414-035-210. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Carlson. So we will reconvene at 6:35. Give us a 5-minute break in the RPU boardroom, and I believe people will point us in the right direction. The council will reconvene.